Hello everyone, welcome. It's fascinating to take a step back in time, to a world that was both harsh and mesmerizing, to the medieval lands of Greece, where life was a continuous struggle and every day brought challenges that seem almost unimaginable today. Imagine walking through narrow, winding streets, the scent of smoke and wood fires hanging in the air, the sounds of merchants calling out their wares, and the constant clatter of hooves as riders pass on cobbled roads, carrying news from distant towns or the latest decree from a local lord. In these times, people lived in a delicate balance between survival and despair, and even the simplest tasks required careful planning, patience, and often a bit of luck. Before we dive deeper into this world, I am curious, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are right now? It's always intriguing to know who joins these journeys through history. Life in medieval Greece was heavily dictated by the seasons and by the ever-present struggle to obtain enough food. Fields were small and often rocky, leaving little space for crops to grow, yet families had to rely on them for survival. Barley, wheat, and olives formed the core of the diet, often supplemented by wild herbs, vegetables grown in modest gardens, and occasionally, fruits that could survive the harsh climate. Bread, when it could be baked, was coarse and dense, more sustenance than delight, and meals were often shared quickly, eaten while standing or seated on simple wooden benches. Fish from nearby rivers and the sea provided some variety, and in coastal villages, salted or dried fish might appear on the table, though meat was a rare luxury, reserved for celebrations or for those wealthy enough to afford it. Many families also raised goats or sheep, providing milk, cheese, and occasionally meat. The effort to preserve food through salting, drying, or fermenting was a skill passed from one generation to the next, as every preserved morsel could mean the difference between life and death during the long, unforgiving winters. Daily routines were exhausting, and the hours of daylight were measured not by clocks but by the rising and setting of the sun. Men labored in the fields, plowing the rocky soil with wooden plows drawn by oxen, their hands blistered and backs aching from long hours under the hot sun. Women worked just as hard, tending the household, caring for children, spinning wool into yarn, and preparing meals that required hours of preparation over open flames. Children were expected to help from a young age, learning to herd goats, collect firewood, and carry water from the wells that were often far from home. There was little room for idleness, and even in moments of rest, people were thinking ahead, planning for the next season, the next storm, or the next threat from bandits or rival villages. Entertainment, though scarce, was deeply rooted in local traditions and communal gatherings. Songs, dances, and stories passed orally from one generation to another provided not only distraction but also education, keeping alive tales of heroes, gods, and battles long past. Festivals occurred in connection with religious observances or seasonal milestones, where villagers would gather to celebrate with simple dances, music played on flutes and lyres, and a sharing of whatever food could be spared. These occasions were moments of relief from the harshness of everyday life, though they were fleeting, and the laborious routine returned immediately after the last drumbeat faded into the night. Health was another constant struggle. Without access to modern medicine, injuries or common illnesses could quickly become life-threatening. Herbs and rudimentary remedies were relied upon, often administered by women of the household who carried the knowledge of generations. Epidemics, malnutrition, and poor sanitation meant that mortality rates were high, and the cycle of birth and death was unrelentingly visible in every village. The strong and resourceful survived, while many quietly disappeared, their lives recorded only in whispered memories or in the sparse writings of monks who chronicled the events of their times. Trade and communication were perilous yet vital. Merchants traveled great distances with goods, often risking robbery, harsh weather, and the unpredictable politics of the era. Roads were rough and dangerous, lined with dense forests where thieves and wild animals could strike at any moment. Travelers relied on inns and the hospitality of strangers, sharing tales, warnings, and news as they moved between towns and cities. Trade brought salt, spices, textiles, and metal tools to local communities, but it was always measured, precious, and worth more than simple coin. The exchange of goods was also a conduit for ideas, traditions, and the occasional spark of curiosity that connected even the most isolated villages to the wider world beyond their hills and rivers. And yet, despite all these challenges, life persisted. Families found joy in small achievements, in the birth of a child, in the completion of a harvest, or in the rare but cherished moments of community celebration. People adapted to their environment with remarkable resilience, finding ingenious ways to survive in a world where the margin for error was slim and the weight of daily survival was relentless. Every object, every meal, every action carried significance, for in medieval Greece, nothing was taken for granted. Even laughter, fleeting as it might have been, was treasured, a silent rebellion against the harshness that surrounded them. This was a world shaped by endurance, by the harsh touch of nature, by the careful management of resources, and by the intricate web of social obligations and expectations. The medieval Greek landscape was not just physical. It was a map of human struggle, ingenuity, and the fragile hope that life could persist despite the weight of hardship pressing from all sides as the sun crept over the hills of medieval Greece, painting the landscape in soft gold and amber. The villages slowly awakened to the rhythm of labor and life that had persisted for centuries. Each village had its own character, defined by the terrain, the crops that could be coaxed from the soil, and the resources available to sustain its inhabitants. Some settlements clung to the edges of fertile valleys, where wheat and barley could be grown in modest abundance, while others perched on rocky hillsides, where goats and sheep roamed freely and provided the primary sustenance. Life in these settlements was governed not by ambition but by necessity, the ceaseless demands of survival shaping every choice, every interaction, and even the flow of conversation. Morning chores were relentless. Women lit fires in stone hearths, preparing porridge or stews that would fuel their families for the day. The aroma of boiling grains mingled with the earthy scent of freshly drawn water, the steam rising like a silent hymn to the work that lay ahead. Children carried jugs of water from wells, their small hands blistered, yet they learned early that their contribution was vital, that one neglected task could ripple across the day and disrupt the delicate balance of household life. Men led oxen into the fields, guiding heavy plows through stubborn soil, their muscles straining against the relentless pull, while their minds were often occupied by calculations of how many days remained until harvest, or whether a patch of land would yield enough to see them through the winter. Meals were simple but meaningful, often eaten in hurried silence between tasks or shared quietly at dusk after the work of the day had ended. Bread was thick and coarse, sometimes mixed with barley or rye, baked over open flames or in small clay ovens. Olive oil was a prized commodity, drizzled over vegetables or bread, imparting both flavor and the essential calories needed to sustain laboring bodies. Fish, preserved in salt, could provide occasional variety, and for those fortunate enough, a small portion of meat might be shared during special occasions or feast days. Dairy products from goats or sheep were common. Cheeses varied from soft and fresh to harder, aged varieties that could last longer without spoiling. Herbs, gathered from gardens or wild hillsides, added both taste and a touch of medicinal value to otherwise plain dishes. Their subtle flavors a reminder of the intimate connection people maintained with the natural world. Beyond the necessary labor, leisure was measured and communal. Evenings brought a chance to share stories, sing songs, and engage in dances that had been performed for generations. Music was rudimentary but deeply ingrained. Lyres, flutes, and simple drums accompanying tales of gods, heroes, and past battles. Storytellers were revered for their memory and their skill, carrying oral histories that preserved not only the facts but the emotions, fears, and hopes of the people. These gatherings also served as a subtle form of education, teaching children about morals, consequences, and the lessons embedded in the triumphs and tragedies of those who came before. The narrative itself became a lifeline, a bridge between generations, and a reminder that even in harsh conditions, culture and imagination could persist. Religion was deeply intertwined with daily life, a constant presence that guided behavior, justified hardship, and provided hope. Temples, shrines, and small altars could be found in almost every village, and ritual practices were woven into the routines of the day. Offerings of food, wine, or small trinkets were made to appease gods and spirits, seeking protection from illness, crop failure, or bandits. Priests or elders often mediated these rituals, their roles blending authority, superstition, and practical advice, ensuring that spiritual life remained a tangible part of everyday existence. Festivals, aligned with both agricultural cycles and religious observances, punctuated the monotony of labor, bringing color, music, and shared joy, if only briefly, before the relentless demands of survival resumed. The political landscape added another layer of complexity. Lords and local rulers exercised varying degrees of control, collecting taxes, demanding labor, or enforcing military service. The peasants, though largely powerless in the formal hierarchy, were resourceful in navigating these demands, sometimes negotiating, sometimes resisting quietly, always aware that defiance could carry severe consequences. Trade and communication with nearby towns or distant regions offered glimpses of a world beyond the village. Yet these connections were fraught with danger. Roads were treacherous, and travel often meant exposure to both natural hazards and human threats. A single journey could be an adventure, an ordeal, or a lesson in humility, depending on the mercy of circumstances. Despite the weight of these pressures, human resilience shone through. Families developed routines that balanced work, survival, and social cohesion. Skills were honed not only out of necessity but as a form of pride, crafting better tools, constructing sturdier homes, improving irrigation, or perfecting recipes that maximize nutrition from scarce ingredients. Every action carried significance. Even a small innovation could improve the odds of survival. Villagers understood the fragility of their world, yet they adapted, creating networks of support, tradition, and knowledge that allowed life to continue even under the most demanding circumstances. And so, the medieval Greek world unfolded in a tapestry of effort, endurance, and fleeting moments of respite. Every sunrise was both a promise and a challenge. Every sunset a relief, but also a reminder of the cycle that would resume with the dawn. It was a world where survival demanded not only strength but intelligence, foresight, and the subtle ability to navigate the interwoven demands of labor, society, and belief. While life was often brutal, it was never static. It moved with the rhythm of seasons, human ambition, and the delicate balance between despair and hope, leaving traces in every stone path, every field tilled, every song sung under the flickering light of a hearth. As the seasons turned and the landscape of medieval Greece shifted under the weight of time, the lives of its inhabitants became a constant negotiation between necessity and fleeting reprieve, a dance of survival that seemed both predictable and endlessly unforgiving. In the villages that dotted the hills and valleys, every stone, every furrowed field, and every humble home bore witness to generations who had learned, often painfully, how to endure. The economy of daily life revolved around craft, trade, and the unyielding rhythm of the seasons. Blacksmiths hammered iron in small forges, their hands blackened by soot, creating tools, nails, and the occasional weapon, each item essential for both survival and the occasional defense against roaming bandits or hostile neighbors. Carpenters shaped wood into carts, plows, and simple furniture, while potters molded clay into jars and plates that would hold the modest sustenance of the villagers. Each artisan's skill was not merely a trade but a lifeline, a tangible contribution to the delicate ecosystem of the village where scarcity could turn a minor miscalculation into disaster. Markets were hubs of both commerce and gossip, places where news traveled as quickly as goods. Merchants arrived from distant towns, their carts creaking under sacks of grains, dried fruits, spices, or textiles. Negotiation was an art, patience, and necessity, for the value of a single coin could shift the balance of survival. Children often ran between stalls, playing among the wares while absorbing lessons in trade, observation, and cunning from their elders. Bartering was common as cash was scarce, and ingenuity often outweighed wealth. A carefully mended basket could be traded for a jug of olive oil, or a small goat for a sack of grain. In these exchanges, survival depended as much on social intelligence as on material resources. and the ability to read people was as valuable as any tool forged in the fire of a blacksmith's forge. The diet of medieval Greeks, while constrained by circumstance, reflected a profound connection to the land and the seasons. Wild herbs such as oregano, thyme, and sage were not merely culinary additions but part of a rudimentary pharmacy. Their leaves steeped in hot water to ease minor ailments, or crushed into pastes to soothe wounds. Vegetables like onions, leeks, and cabbage formed the backbone of most meals, often boiled or roasted over open flames, and occasionally enriched with bits of cheese or olive oil. Meat, rare and prized, was mostly reserved for feasts or celebrations, a symbol of status as much as sustenance. Fish, often preserved by salting or drying, provided a protein source for coastal or riverine communities, and eggs from chickens or ducks added variety when available. The act of eating was both functional and ceremonial, a brief interlude that punctuated long hours of labor but also reinforced family bonds and the communal sharing of limited resources. Daily life was punctuated by both toil and vigilance. Beyond the immediate labor of tending fields, homes, and animals, villagers had to guard against unpredictable dangers. Bandits roamed the hills, especially after harvests, targeting the weak, the isolated, or those burdened with goods. Wolves and other predators prowled forests and pastures, threatening livestock and, occasionally, people. Villagers learned to navigate these risks, traveling in groups, using watchtowers or dogs for early warnings, and maintaining paths and clearings that minimized exposure to hidden threats. Even children were educated in caution, taught not only how to help with chores, but how to recognize danger, read the land, and understand that survival depended as much on awareness as on strength or skill. Religious observances intertwined seamlessly with these practical considerations. Small shrines, often adorned with simple carvings or painted symbols, dotted the landscape, and villagers made offerings for protection, fertility, or successful harvests. Rituals marked the passage of time, from planting and harvesting to life events like births, marriages, and deaths. Priests and elders guided these ceremonies, blending spiritual authority with the practical knowledge needed to keep communities cohesive and morale intact. Even in times of scarcity, these practices provided a psychological anchor, reinforcing a sense of order and continuity in a world where chaos often lurked just beyond the horizon. Amidst the routine, moments of joy and communal bonding punctuated the harshness. Children played games that mimicked adult tasks, learning skills while laughing and running through dusty streets or open fields. Music and dance brought temporary escape from monotony, with simple instruments like flutes, drums, or lyres accompanying songs passed down orally for generations. Storytelling was both entertainment and education, preserving history, ethics, and legends that shaped cultural identity and provided a shared sense of belonging. Villagers took pride in these traditions, knowing that even as the physical world demanded their energy, the intangible world of song, story, and ritual allowed them to endure, to hope, and to remember that life, despite its difficulties, had richness beyond survival alone. The ever-present specter of disease and poor health added another layer of tension. Epidemics could sweep through villages with alarming speed, claiming lives indiscriminately and leaving grief-stricken families in their wake. With rudimentary medical knowledge, villagers relied on herbal remedies, the advice of local healers, and prayers to gods and saints for protection. Even minor injuries could become fatal if infections set in, and childbirth was perilous, claiming the lives of both mother and child more often than modern sensibilities would expect. Life was fragile, yet the human instinct for perseverance was stronger, creating patterns of adaptation, innovation, and communal support that allowed villages to persist through cycles of hardship and recovery. Through all these experiences, the labor, the vigilance, the modest celebrations, the constant negotiation with nature, authority, and fortune, the people of medieval Greece carved out a life that was astonishing in its resilience. Each stone path, each carefully tilled plot, each handcrafted tool, and every shared meal bore witness to a society that, while constrained by scarcity and danger, found ways to endure, connect, and even thrive in small but meaningful ways. The medieval Greek world was a tapestry of struggle, adaptation, and fleeting beauty, a world that demanded attention to detail, mindfulness, and a deep understanding of both human capability and limitation, shaping generations who understood, instinctively, that life's value was measured not by comfort but by persistence, creativity, and the capacity to continue despite hardship. Life in medieval Greece was never truly at peace, for the shadow of conflict stretched across the hills and valleys as persistently as the sun rose and set. Raiders and bandits were not occasional threats. They were a constant reality that shaped how villagers lived, traveled, and even celebrated. The knowledge that one misstep or a poorly timed journey could lead to robbery, injury, or death forced people to cultivate both caution and cunning. Men carried simple weapons, wooden clubs, short swords, or spears, crafted in local forges, while communities relied on lookouts and warning signals to alert them of approaching danger. Fortifications, however modest, were vital. High walls, watchtowers, and narrow gates protected not only the village but the dignity and lives of those inside. Even in smaller settlements, neighbors worked together to reinforce these defenses, knowing that unity could mean the difference between survival and devastation. The presence of lords, dukes, and other nobility added complexity to village life. These rulers often claimed distant authority, collecting taxes, demanding labor, or enforcing military service. While some were just and fair, others imposed harsh levies, taking a portion of crops, livestock, or even labor for construction projects, leaving villagers with barely enough to survive. The relationship between ruler and ruled was a careful negotiation, a balance of obedience, subtle resistance, and sometimes clever manipulation. Peasants learned to read the temperament of their lords, offering deference where necessary, but also finding small ways to protect their families, whether through concealment of surplus, discreet trade, or strategic alliances with neighbors. The power dynamics were delicate and often invisible, yet they governed much of the daily rhythm of life, shaping decisions as fundamental as which fields to sow or which path to take to fetch water. Epidemics and diseases were another invisible force, shaping communities in ways that could not be predicted. Villages were tightly packed, sanitation rudimentary, and the understanding of contagion almost non-existent. Outbreaks of plague, dysentery, or influenza could strike swiftly, leaving sorrow, fear, and disruption in their wake. Families might bury multiple members in a short span of time, and midwives and healers worked tirelessly to treat the sick with herbs, poultices, and rituals that combined practical remedies with spiritual reassurance. Every visit to the well, every shared tool, every crowded market became a potential risk, forcing villagers to weigh the benefits of communal interaction against the dangers of infection. The psychological toll was profound. Grief and anxiety were constant companions, yet the human instinct to adapt and survive remained resilient. In the midst of these dangers, ordinary life continued with its own subtle rhythm and ingenuity. Villagers had developed a multitude of clever strategies to make their lives more manageable. Roofs were built steeply to shed rain and snow, while small granaries were raised off the ground to protect the harvest from rodents. Smoke from hearths and fires was not only used for cooking but also served to deter pests and keep insects away from food storage areas. Livestock were carefully tended, fenced, and rotated to prevent disease, and gardens were designed to maximize yield even on rocky or sloped terrain. Every element of construction, every choice of crop or seed, every small improvement to tools or technique carried significance, a quiet testament to human ingenuity against the limitations of environment and technology. Entertainment, though limited, remained a crucial part of village life, offering moments of relief from relentless labor and the ever-present threats. Seasonal festivals were vivid, temporary respites where music, dance, and communal storytelling transformed the mundane into something almost magical. Villagers performed rituals that honored gods, nature, and ancestral spirits, often accompanied by simple instruments. A lyre strummed with care, flutes played in gentle harmonies, or drums marking a steady rhythm for dancers. Stories were passed down orally, their narratives blending history, morality, and cautionary lessons. Children listened wide-eyed to tales of heroism, tragedy, and cunning, learning to navigate both imagination and real-world challenges. These gatherings also reinforced social bonds, ensuring that even the harshest realities of life were softened, if only briefly, by laughter, music, and shared experience. Even in moments of respite, vigilance was never completely abandoned. Travelers and merchants arriving in town carried news, goods, and sometimes danger, and villagers had learned to welcome visitors cautiously, balancing generosity with prudence. A single unguarded act could result in theft, quarrel, or worse. Yet the exchange of goods and ideas was essential to survival and connection with the wider world. Trade brought not only essential resources but also glimpses of distant lands, technologies, and customs that could be adapted to local conditions. The blending of practical necessity with curiosity allowed communities to remain dynamic, even under the constraints of scarcity, conflict, and disease. Through it all, the human spirit persisted in its quiet, steadfast ways. Families maintained routines, learned from misfortune, and passed down both knowledge and resilience to younger generations. Humor, creativity, and resourcefulness were survival tools as essential as food, water, and shelter. Life in medieval Greece was a mosaic of struggle, strategy, and small triumphs, where every day was an interplay of labor, caution, ingenuity, and fleeting moments of joy. Even under the oppressive weight of hardship, people adapted, found meaning, and endured, leaving behind traces of a life that was both demanding and profoundly human. A testament to the extraordinary resilience that emerges when survival is never guaranteed, and every day must be earned with effort, skill, and hope. Life in medieval Greece was a delicate dance of survival, resourcefulness, and occasional delight, a tapestry woven from the threads of labor, tradition, and the unpredictable whims of nature. Villagers relied not only on the soil and their livestock, but also on a rich variety of crafts that kept communities functioning and, at times, thriving. Carpentry, blacksmithing, weaving, and pottery were not mere occupations. They were lifelines, skills that determined whether a family could eat, travel, or protect itself. A master blacksmith could shape iron into sturdy plows, nails, or weapons, and his work was essential not only for daily survival, but for the occasional defense against bandits or neighboring raiders. Carpenters built homes, carts, and wooden tools, their hands constantly scarred, their backs bent from the repetitive motions of measuring, cutting, and joining. Weavers transformed raw wool or flax into cloth, creating garments that, while simple, provided warmth and protection, often dyed with natural pigments that required meticulous preparation and patience. Potters shaped clay into jars, bowls, and storage containers that preserved the precious grains, water, and other essentials that sustained life. Every object carried the imprint of human ingenuity, a quiet testament to the effort required to survive in a world where resources were scarce and every tool mattered. Markets were lively, chaotic, and central to village life. Even though cash was limited, trade was vibrant, relying on barter, favors, and occasional coin. Merchants brought salt, olive oil, textiles, pottery, and other goods from distant towns, and their arrival sparked curiosity, gossip, and careful negotiation. Children often ran between stalls, mimicking adults while learning the subtle arts of persuasion and assessment. Farmers exchanged surplus produce for needed tools, craftsmen traded goods for food, and everyone remained keenly aware of value, scarcity, and the precariousness of fortune. Markets were not merely economic hubs. They were social crossroads, where news traveled as fast as goods, where alliances were formed, and where one could glimpse both the wealth and vulnerability of the wider world. Religious practice intertwined seamlessly with daily existence, infusing mundane tasks with meaning and offering guidance amid uncertainty. Shrines, temples, and small altars dotted hillsides, streets, and homes, and offerings of food, wine, or symbolic objects were made regularly to appease gods, spirits, or ancestors. Priests and elders, often blending ritual knowledge with practical advice, guided villagers through ceremonies marking planting, harvesting, marriage, death, and seasonal transitions. Even during harsh winters or periods of scarcity, Spiritual life provided structure, hope, and a sense of continuity that mitigated the psychological weight of survival. Festivals, though brief, brought color, music, and communal joy. Villagers sang, danced, and recited stories that wove together history, myth, and moral lessons, strengthening bonds and reminding people that life could hold moments of delight even under the most relentless pressure. Children grew up quickly, learning the balance between work, survival, and small pleasures. They tended animals, gathered firewood, helped in gardens, and observed the meticulous labor of their elders, absorbing lessons in practical skills, social negotiation, and the unpredictable patterns of both nature and human behavior. Games often mirrored adult responsibilities. A mock herding contest taught observation and patience, while pretend trading sharpened awareness of value, timing, and negotiation. Even play was purposeful, training them to navigate a world in which knowledge, vigilance, and cunning were as essential as physical strength. Food preparation was labor-intensive yet central to both sustenance and culture. Women spent hours tending hearths, grinding grains, stirring stews, kneading dough, and preserving produce. Herbs and spices, whether cultivated or gathered from the wild, were used to enhance flavor and provide medicinal benefits. Meals were often simple: a bowl of porridge, bread dipped in olive oil, vegetables boiled with herbs, but each ingredient was carefully considered, for waste was dangerous in a world where scarcity was a constant threat. Preservation techniques, from salting fish and meat to drying grains and fruits, allowed families to survive lean periods and harsh winters, but they required skill, patience, and the constant attention of those responsible for food storage. Social interactions extended beyond the immediate household. Villagers depended on one another not only for labor but for protection, information, and mutual support. Gossip, though often trivial, served as an informal intelligence network, conveying warnings of approaching dangers, news of neighboring communities, or the arrival of a traveling merchant. Social bonds were essential, for isolation could be fatal. Families worked together during harvests, shared labor for construction or repairs, and organized collective defense against threats. In every interaction, there was a subtle awareness of hierarchy, reputation, and the delicate balance between cooperation and self-preservation. Evenings brought a slow release from the relentless pace of daily labor. Around hearths, families gathered, telling stories, singing, and reflecting on the day's work. Music, whether improvised or learned, filled small homes with warmth, while narratives passed down from elders offered both entertainment and moral guidance. These quiet moments of reflection, laughter, and shared experience reinforced communal ties and allowed individuals to recover, mentally and physically, for the challenges of the next day. Yet, beneath the surface of routine and tradition, danger remained ever present. Disease could strike unexpectedly, injuries could become fatal, and raiders or bandits could disrupt even the most carefully organized village life. Villagers adapted, developing strategies for protection, prevention, and survival, cultivating a mixture of caution, skill, and foresight that allowed them to endure. Every day was a test of resilience, creativity, and the ability to balance immediate needs with long-term planning, a constant negotiation between human ambition and the formidable challenges of the environment. Life in medieval Greece, despite its hardships, was vibrant in its own way. The rhythm of labor, the meticulous attention to craft, the fleeting pleasures of music and storytelling, and the delicate navigation of risk and opportunity created a world in which survival was an achievement, ingenuity was a necessity, and even small moments of joy were precious. The landscape, the social structure, the seasons, and the human spirit combined to form a living mosaic of endurance, adaptation, and the quiet triumphs of ordinary people striving to carve out a life in a world that demanded vigilance, courage, and constant creativity. In medieval Greece, the line between the tangible and the unseen was often blurred, as villagers relied not only on labor and skill but also on belief, superstition, and the subtle practice of magic to navigate a world full of uncertainties. The forests, hills, and rivers were not just landscapes. They were alive with spirits, omens, and hidden dangers, a constant reminder that survival required both physical effort and spiritual vigilance. People carried charms made of bones, stones, or herbs, hung talismans above doors, and whispered prayers to gods, saints, or local spirits. Midwives, healers, and wise women often doubled as custodians of mystical knowledge, preparing herbal remedies, protective amulets, and rituals that blended practical medicine with spiritual guidance. These practices were essential for a sudden illness, an unexpected injury, or even a failed harvest could be interpreted as a sign of displeasure from unseen forces, and ignoring such warnings was considered perilous. Daily life required the careful negotiation of both the seen and unseen worlds. Men and women labored from sunrise to sunset, tending fields, livestock, and homes, yet their actions were guided by omens, superstitions, and ritual observances. Planting seeds at the wrong time, breaking certain taboos, or neglecting offerings could invite misfortune, while careful attention to these small rituals was believed to ensure prosperity, health, and safety. Children learned these practices naturally, observing elders and absorbing both practical knowledge and the layers of belief that shaped decision-making. Play often mimicked these lessons, with games involving miniature tools, mock planting, or pretend rituals, reinforcing understanding of the delicate balance between work, luck, and unseen forces. Medical knowledge was rudimentary but deeply intertwined with these beliefs. Villagers relied on herbs, poultices, and mixtures prepared from local plants, often administered alongside chants, prayers, or symbolic gestures. Fever, wounds, or infections were treated with a combination of observation, practical remedies, and spiritual intervention. A fever might be cooled with a compress of vinegar and water while a prayer was recited, and a cut could be dressed with honey or plant sap as a symbolic plea for healing. The line between superstition and practical efficacy was blurred, yet both were crucial, and the confidence of the healer often determined whether a patient survived or succumbed. Even minor ailments could become life-threatening, reinforcing the importance of knowledge passed from generation to generation, a fragile thread connecting past experience with present survival. Conflict remained an ever-present shadow. Villages fortified themselves against raiders, rival communities, and the occasional military levy from distant lords. Training was informal but constant, and even children learned the basics of self-defense, carrying small sticks, slings, or knives, playing at combat while understanding its necessity. Watchtowers and fences, often constructed collectively, offered protection, and early warning systems, such as bells or signal fires, became lifelines during attacks. Those who ventured into forests, mountains, or roads alone did so at great risk, yet trade, social obligations, and curiosity required movement, forcing constant negotiation with danger. Family life was a crucible of survival, loyalty, and occasional tension. Households were large and multigenerational, with grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes distant relatives living under one roof. Roles were clearly defined. Men worked the fields or crafts, women managed food, childcare, and domestic production, and children assisted wherever possible. Conflicts were inevitable, arguments over resources, responsibilities, or authority, but they were often subtle, restrained by the awareness that survival demanded cooperation. Marriages were not only emotional bonds but also strategic alliances, strengthening ties between families, sharing labor, and consolidating resources. Love and affection existed, but it was always entwined with pragmatism and necessity. Despite the relentless labor and omnipresent dangers, moments of celebration and entertainment persisted, threaded throughout the year like intermittent rays of sunlight through clouds. Festivals connected the sacred with the communal, providing opportunities to sing, dance, and enjoy music, often under the guidance of elders or traveling performers. Children played with improvised toys, practiced storytelling, and engaged in games that mirrored adult tasks, blending education with amusement. Seasonal fairs brought outsiders into the village, trading goods, sharing news, and offering glimpses of distant lands or innovations that could be adapted locally. Even small moments, an evening meal, a shared song, or a quiet conversation by the hearth, were treasured, brief reprieves that reminded villagers that life, though demanding, still held small joys. The natural environment, while beautiful, was unforgiving. Harsh winters brought snow and frost, slowing travel, threatening livestock, and making work in the fields nearly impossible. Summers were relentless, with scorching heat and drought threatening crops, while storms could wash away soil, ruin harvests, or damage homes. Villagers learned to read the sky, observe animal behavior, and anticipate the subtle shifts in climate that could spell either opportunity or disaster. Every season required preparation. Granaries stocked, tools repaired, livestock tended, and paths cleared. The environment dictated life's rhythm, shaping labor, leisure, and even belief systems, as people interpreted natural events as omens, lessons, or divine messages. Amid all this, hope persisted in small human ways. Music, storytelling, shared meals, clever problem-solving, and the bonds of family and community provided a buffer against the harsh realities of life. Even under the constant pressure of scarcity, danger, and uncertainty, villagers adapted, creating networks of support, traditions of care, and moments of joy that ensured both survival and a sense of continuity. Life in medieval Greece was a delicate balance, a constant negotiation between the tangible and intangible, the practical and mystical, the immediate demands of survival and the enduring hope that tomorrow might bring relief, fortune, or at least a brief moment of beauty in a world that demanded resilience above all else. In the quiet folds of the Greek hills, life persisted not merely as survival, but as a delicate interplay between labor, ingenuity, and the human need for connection. Craftspeople were the invisible backbone of the villages, their skills shaping not only tools and structures, but the rhythm of daily life. Blacksmiths, their hands scorched and calloused, bent iron over glowing coals, forging plows that would turn stubborn soil and simple swords to ward off danger, all while ensuring nails and hinges held the fragile wooden frames of homes together. Carpenters worked tirelessly, transforming timber into doors, beams, carts, and furniture, their creations essential for both everyday life and long-term resilience. Weavers turned rough threads of wool or flax into garments capable of withstanding wind, rain, and winter frost, often adding subtle decorative patterns that reflected local identity or family pride. Potters shaped clay into jars, bowls, and amphorae that stored grains, liquids, and preserved foods, every curve of their work balancing utility with care. In this way, each artisan's labor was a quiet act of survival, a thread connecting past generations with the present and future. Trade was a lifeline, its reach extending beyond the boundaries of a single village. Markets were chaotic, vibrant, and often the only way to acquire goods unavailable locally. Merchants arrived with spices, dried fruits, fabrics, metalwork, and even rare items like sugar or exotic pottery, sparking both awe and careful calculation among villagers. Negotiation was a learned skill, honed from years of bartering and observation, as the value of a single coin, a sack of grain, or a handful of herbs could shift the balance of survival. Children observed these exchanges with wide eyes, absorbing lessons in commerce, observation, and social dynamics, and often participated in small ways, running errands or assisting with the weighing and measuring of goods. Markets were also centers of communication, carrying news from distant towns, rumors of approaching dangers, and hints of opportunities for alliances or trade, making them as crucial to information as they were to resources. Festivals and communal gatherings punctuated the rhythm of labor, offering brief yet vital opportunities for celebration and relief. Seasonal events, aligned with planting or harvest cycles and religious observances, filled villages with music, dance, and storytelling. Simple instruments, lyres, flutes, drums, set the tempo for communal dances, while elders recited tales of gods, heroes, and past battles, their voices weaving history and myth into lessons for younger generations. Food was shared generously, often in forms preserved specifically for the occasion. Dried fruits, cheeses, bread enriched with olive oil or honey, and occasionally salted or smoked meats for those who could afford them. These gatherings reinforced social bonds, strengthened familial ties, and provided psychological sustenance as essential as the food consumed. A reminder that even amidst hardship, humans sought connection, rhythm, and beauty. Yet life remained fragile. Epidemics swept through villages with little warning, claiming the lives of both young and old, leaving grief and fear in their wake. Illnesses that today might be considered minor could become deadly due to the lack of advanced medical knowledge, and healing often depended on a combination of herbal remedies, superstition, and prayer. Midwives and healers were crucial, blending practical knowledge with rituals that offered comfort and hope, yet success was never guaranteed. Families experienced loss with stark regularity, and the emotional weight of death was balanced by the necessity of continuing daily life, tending fields, animals, and household tasks despite grief. War and external threats shaped villages as much as natural forces or disease. Raiders, rival lords, and sometimes armies demanded vigilance, fortification, and strategy. Watchtowers overlooked key paths, fences encircled valuable livestock, and simple weapons were always at hand. Training was informal but pervasive. Men practiced spear techniques, slinging stones or wielding short swords. Older boys learned the basics alongside adults, while even women became adept in protective measures, planning escape routes or improvised defenses in case of sudden attack. Knowledge of the terrain, combined with vigilance and communal coordination, became essential tools for survival. Every journey along a road, every trip to a distant market or neighboring village carried risk, reinforcing the importance of planning, timing, and cooperation. Family life, though structured and hierarchical, was layered with subtle complexities. Households often included multiple generations, each member contributing labor, wisdom, and emotional support. Authority was balanced with necessity. While elders dictated work schedules and responsibilities, negotiation and small acts of agency were common among younger members, creating a fluid dynamic shaped by survival imperatives. Marriages were simultaneously emotional bonds and strategic alliances, consolidating resources, strengthening familial networks, and increasing collective resilience. Love and affection existed but were intertwined with pragmatic concerns, for survival, food, and protection often took precedence over personal desire. Amidst these pressures, small joys persisted. Children played in fields or courtyards, sometimes reenacting adult work in playful simulations, sometimes inventing games with stones, sticks, or improvised toys. Music and dance provided relief from labor, weaving joy into otherwise monotonous routines. Storytelling offered both entertainment and education, conveying cultural memory, ethical lessons, and strategies for navigating the unpredictable world. Even quiet moments around a hearth, sharing a modest meal or reflecting on the day, became precious spaces where human connection and resilience were nurtured. Nature, beautiful yet unpredictable, dictated much of village life. Winters brought snow, ice, and frozen fields, making daily tasks grueling and threatening both crops and livestock. Summers could scorch the land, creating drought, dust, and strain on water supplies. Storms threatened to wash away harvests or damage homes, forcing constant preparation, adaptation, and vigilance. Villagers observed subtle cues in weather patterns, animal behavior, and environmental shifts, interpreting these signs both practically, for planning, and spiritually, as messages from the divine or omens to guide their actions. Through all these interwoven threads, labor, craft, trade, ritual, joy, danger, and adaptation, villagers carved a life that, while fraught with hardship, demonstrated remarkable resilience. The rhythm of daily labor, the communal bonds, the interplay of practical skill and belief, and the constant negotiation with environment, authority, and unseen forces created a living tapestry that defined medieval Greece. Every stone path, every handcrafted tool, every story sung or told around the hearth, and every measured risk was part of a larger mosaic, a world where survival required not only strength and skill but imagination, ingenuity, and the quiet persistence of the human spirit. In medieval Greece, survival demanded both tangible skill and subtle understanding, a combination of labor, observation, and an intuitive grasp of forces beyond the visible world. Villagers were acutely aware that life could be as cruel as it was beautiful, and every action, from sowing seeds to preparing a meal, from tending livestock to walking a forest path, required careful thought and awareness. Craftspeople continued to anchor the community, their work shaping both the physical and social landscape. The blacksmith's hammer rang against glowing iron, shaping tools, nails, and plowshares with precision, each strike both purposeful and rhythmic, an auditory pulse that defined the village's heartbeat. Carpenters measured, sawed, and joined timber, constructing homes, granaries, and carts, their work sustaining both comfort and survival, while weavers and potters infused artistry into utilitarian objects, offering glimpses of beauty amidst relentless labor. These crafts were not merely occupations. They were acts of resilience, tangible proofs of adaptation to a world that demanded constant effort. Markets remained centers of commerce, information, and subtle strategy. Merchants from nearby towns or distant regions arrived with fabrics, spices, dried fruits, salt, and rare items, transforming village squares into vibrant arenas of exchange. Bartering required patience, wit, and keen observation. The value of a single coin or a handful of grain could shift the delicate balance of household survival. Children shadowed adults, learning lessons in negotiation and subtle persuasion while engaging in small tasks, weighing goods, or running errands. Markets were also social hubs, carrying news of political tensions, military movements, or epidemics, as well as gossip that could affect alliances, trade relations, or personal reputation. These spaces offered not only material goods but also critical insights into a world that extended far beyond the village borders. Spiritual life intertwined deeply with everyday practice, providing structure and comfort in a world prone to unpredictability. Shrines, altars, and small temples dotted the landscape, serving as both spiritual anchors and social centers. Villagers left offerings of oil, wine, or small coins, seeking favor from gods, spirits, or ancestors. Rituals coincided with planting, harvest, and seasonal transitions, blending agricultural necessity with spiritual observance. Festivals were both celebratory and instructional, weaving music, dance, and storytelling into lessons of morality, history, and communal identity. Lyres and flutes accompanied dances that mirrored the rhythm of labor and seasonal cycles, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary tales transmitted practical wisdom alongside cultural heritage. Even brief moments of shared joy, singing a song, performing a dance, or participating in a communal feast, offered respite and reinforced the psychological resilience necessary to endure hardship. Illness remained a formidable threat, shaping both practical and spiritual behavior. Epidemics spread swiftly, often fueled by crowded living conditions and rudimentary sanitation. Villagers relied on herbal remedies, poultices, and rituals administered by midwives, wise women, or traveling healers. Plants such as sage, thyme, and chamomile were boiled or crushed into mixtures to treat fever, infection, or wounds, frequently accompanied by prayers, incantations, or protective charms. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, careful treatment, and communal support. Families experienced grief with stark regularity, yet the cycle of labor, protection, and care continued, reinforcing resilience and the unbroken flow of village life despite loss. The shadow of conflict permeated daily existence. Raiders, rival lords, and distant armies required vigilance, defense, and strategic planning. Villagers fortified homes and barns, built watchtowers and fences, and maintained improvised weapons. Training, though informal, was pervasive. Men practiced combat with spears, slings, or short swords, while older boys learned to read the terrain and anticipate danger. Even women became adept at protective measures, organizing children, preparing supplies, and knowing escape routes. Every journey, whether to the market, fields, or neighboring village, carried inherent risk, making careful observation and coordination essential. Knowledge of the land, hidden paths, safe water sources, and natural cover was as critical as physical strength, offering protection against both human and animal threats. Family and household life provided stability and structure amidst external pressures. Multigenerational homes blended authority and cooperation, with elders guiding labor, children contributing to chores, and each member understanding their role in sustaining the family unit. Conflicts arose over resource allocation, authority, or minor disputes, but were tempered by necessity, as survival depended on collaboration. Marriages served both emotional and strategic purposes, consolidating resources, forming alliances, and ensuring the continuity of labor and protection across generations. Love and affection existed alongside pragmatic concerns, intertwining emotional bonds with the imperatives of survival. Leisure and creativity flourished even within constraints. Music, storytelling, and games offered essential psychological sustenance. Children engaged in play that mirrored adult responsibilities, preparing them for the complexities of future life while allowing moments of joy. Stories passed down orally preserved history, ethics, and cultural identity, embedding practical lessons within entertaining narratives. Even the simplest domestic rituals, preparing bread, tending a fire, sharing a meal, became intimate spaces where bonds were reinforced and knowledge was transmitted. These patterns of work, play, and ritual created a balanced rhythm, sustaining both body and spirit in a world of scarcity and danger. Nature was both a provider and a relentless teacher. Winters brought snow, ice, and freezing winds that tested shelter, clothing, and resource reserves. Summers could scorch crops, parch water supplies, and expose villagers to drought. Storms threatened property and harvest, requiring constant attention and preparedness. Observing natural signs, animal behavior, cloud formations, wind patterns was essential not only for survival, but also for interpreting them as spiritual messages or omens. Adaptation, skill, and observation became intertwined, creating a continuous cycle of learning and responding to the environment. Through all of these challenges, labor, trade, superstition, disease, conflict, and environmental pressures, the people of medieval Greece developed remarkable resilience. Survival demanded intelligence, foresight, and cooperation, as well as moments of creativity, joy, and reflection. Villagers forged a world in which the physical, social, and spiritual intertwined, where every action carried consequence, and where even fleeting moments of beauty, humor, or connection contributed to the endurance of communities. Their lives were not merely exercises in survival. They were dynamic, intricate mosaics of human endeavor, shaped by necessity, imagination, and the unyielding drive to persist in a world that demanded vigilance, skill, and an enduring capacity to adapt. Life in medieval Greece demanded ingenuity at every level, a constant negotiation between labor, danger, and fleeting moments of relief. Villagers had learned to adapt not only to natural forces and disease, but also to the unpredictable behaviors of people around them, from fellow villagers to distant lords, merchants, or passing soldiers. Knowledge of the terrain was essential. Hidden paths through forests allowed secret travel, vantage points on hills provided early warning of approaching threats, and the careful observation of animals, birds, wolves, or even domesticated livestock, offered subtle clues about weather, predators, or human intruders. Every journey required preparation. Supplies were gathered, tools carried, and protective measures planned. Even routine tasks, such as fetching water or tending animals, were imbued with vigilance, for mistakes could prove fatal in a world where both human and natural dangers lurked at every turn. Crafts and trades were not merely economic activities. They were essential for survival, teaching problem-solving, precision, and patience. Blacksmiths shaped iron into not only plows and nails, but also weaponry, their work often timed to meet looming threats or seasonal demands. Carpenters crafted furniture, carts, and temporary fortifications, while also repairing structures weakened by storms or siege. Weavers transformed coarse fibers into cloth, their patterns sometimes serving as identification or status markers within and between villages. Potters created storage vessels crucial for food preservation, and their designs could reflect local traditions or personal creativity. Craftspeople often passed knowledge orally, with apprentices learning through observation, imitation, and gradual hands-on practice, ensuring continuity of both technique and communal wisdom. Trade remained the lifeblood of the village economy, linking distant communities and introducing new ideas, materials, and technologies. Markets thrived with noise, color, and strategy. Merchants displayed their goods with pride, villagers haggled with skill, and information flowed alongside commerce. Children learned to recognize fair deals, detect deception, and understand the value of goods through participation and observation. Markets also provided cultural exchange, allowing villagers to witness fashions, culinary practices, and tools from other regions, sometimes adapting them for local use. Even small interactions, an overheard rumor, a demonstration of a new technique, or a shared laugh over a barter, contributed to the community's adaptive capacity, blending practicality with subtle social intelligence. Religious and spiritual life shaped both behavior and social cohesion. Shrines, temples, and household altars provided guidance, comfort, and a framework for interpreting misfortune. Offerings of food, wine, or small valuables accompanied prayers for health, bountiful harvests, or protection from disease. Festivals punctuated the calendar with music, dance, and storytelling, reinforcing moral lessons, historical memory, and communal identity. Villagers sang songs recounting ancient myths or heroic deeds, played instruments during dances, and engaged in ceremonial practices that strengthened bonds and offered psychological relief. These events were brief escapes from labor, yet they were essential, providing rhythm, joy, and collective reassurance in the midst of uncertainty. Disease remained a constant threat, shaping behavior, relationships, and practical knowledge. Epidemics swept unpredictably, claiming lives and leaving grief and fear in their wake. Villagers turned to herbal remedies, poultices, and ritual practices administered by midwives, wise women, or traveling healers. Knowledge of local plants, preparation methods, and application was crucial. Even a minor error could have fatal consequences. Families often worked together to isolate the sick, maintain clean water, and ensure adequate food, combining practical care with spiritual attention, demonstrating the intertwined nature of medicine and belief. Conflict was never far from daily life. Raids, rival lords, and conscripted armies demanded vigilance, strategic foresight, and sometimes improvisation. Watchtowers, fences, and reinforced doors offered partial security, while villagers honed the ability to observe, anticipate, and respond to threats. Training was continuous and informal. Men practiced with spears, slings, and knives. Older boys learned scouting, timing, and observation. Even women developed protective strategies, managing supplies, children, and escape routes. Knowledge of the terrain and community coordination was essential, as the landscape itself, hills, forests, rivers, could serve as both refuge and obstacle. Family dynamics were complex, blending cooperation, hierarchy, and subtle negotiation. Multigenerational households depended on shared labor and mutual support, yet conflicts arose over responsibilities, resources, and authority. Marriages served emotional and strategic purposes, consolidating labor and resources, reinforcing alliances, and ensuring continuity. Affection existed alongside pragmatic considerations, as survival required careful management of both relationships and material needs. Entertainment and creative expression provided vital psychological relief. Music, storytelling, games, and celebrations offered temporary respite, reinforcing social cohesion, transmitting knowledge, and nurturing imagination. Children engaged in playful simulations of adult work, learning practical skills while enjoying moments of joy. Storytelling preserved history, ethics, and cultural memory, intertwining instruction with entertainment. Even simple domestic moments, preparing bread, tending fires, sharing meals, became spaces of connection, reflection, and emotional sustenance, sustaining both individuals and the community. Nature remained both ally and adversary. Winters brought snow, frost, and frozen earth, threatening crops, livestock, and human survival. Summers were scorching, with droughts and storms challenging every preparation. Villagers closely observed environmental signals, learning to anticipate change and adapt, blending practical knowledge with spiritual interpretation. Weather, seasons, and natural patterns dictated labor, celebration, and caution, intertwining human action with the rhythms of the land. Despite hardship, fear, and uncertainty, the people of medieval Greece displayed extraordinary resilience. Their lives were shaped by labor, observation, belief, and community, creating a world in which survival demanded ingenuity, cooperation, and careful attention. Every tool crafted, every lesson passed to a child, every ritual performed, and every calculated risk taken formed a mosaic of human persistence, ingenuity, and hope. Life was not merely endured. It was actively shaped, navigated, and imbued with meaning, demonstrating the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people to persist, adapt, and occasionally even find joy in a world that demanded constant vigilance, skill, and resilience. In medieval Greece, the rhythm of life wove together labor, survival, and subtle competition, creating a world where every skill, relationship, and piece of knowledge could mean the difference between prosperity and hardship. Crafts were central to this intricate tapestry, but they were rarely solitary endeavors. Blacksmiths competed quietly, striving to produce stronger tools, sharper blades, and more durable hardware than their neighbors. Their work was observed and critiqued by both peers and villagers, a silent contest in skill, endurance, and reputation. Carpenters, too, honed not only practical techniques but clever innovations, new joinery methods, reinforced beams, or portable carts that could save labor hours or provide a tactical advantage in transporting goods or defending property. Weavers and potters experimented with patterns, dyes, and glazes, learning which combinations were most durable, aesthetically appealing, or practical for trade. Apprentices observed closely, absorbing secrets passed down orally or demonstrated with meticulous care, often learning subtleties that would define their future mastery. Villagers navigated marketplaces with a mixture of curiosity, strategy, and caution. Seasonal fairs and traveling merchants brought goods, news, and occasionally gossip from distant regions. The value of a sack of grain, a bolt of fabric, or a handful of salt could fluctuate daily, requiring keen observation, shrewd negotiation, and sometimes calculated risk. Children learned early to recognize quality, assess fairness, and observe the subtle cues of body language, gestures, and tone that indicated trust or deception. Markets were also arenas for cultural exchange, exposing villagers to new techniques, tools, and stories that could be adapted to local conditions. Even small exchanges, an improvised charm, a recipe for preservation, a clever method of measurement, could ripple through a community, improving efficiency, survival, and cohesion. Spiritual and ritual life interwove with these practical pursuits, guiding behavior and reinforcing social bonds. Shrines, temples, and household altars were sites of both devotion and communication, where offerings, prayers, and festivals ensured favor, protection, and continuity. Religious ceremonies punctuated planting, harvest, and seasonal cycles, teaching children about ethics, history, and responsibility while providing psychological stability amid the uncertainty of daily existence. Festivals offered music, dance, and storytelling, brief moments of collective relief from labor and danger, reinforcing identity and community memory. Even routine offerings, small gestures, and whispered prayers acted as anchors, linking past, present, and anticipated future, creating continuity in a world where change was constant. Disease remained a persistent threat, shaping social interactions, labor, and precautionary behavior. Epidemics could devastate villages quickly, leaving grief, fear, and disruption in their wake. Knowledge of herbal remedies, poultices, and ritual practices was crucial, passed down from midwives, healers, and wise women. Treatments combined practical applications, such as crushed herbs, boiling water, or poultices, with spiritual elements like prayers, protective charms, and symbolic gestures. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, and prepared resources to sustain those affected, blending practical strategy with hope, patience, and faith. Even minor ailments demanded attention, as failure to act could escalate into fatal outcomes, teaching villagers vigilance and the interconnectedness of health, labor, and survival. Conflict shadowed daily life, influencing both preparation and behavior. Raiders, rival lords, and distant armies required vigilance, strategy, and improvisation. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal structures, trained in the use of spears, knives, and slings, and practiced early warning systems such as bells or signal fires. Older children learned observation, movement, and tactical thinking, often accompanying adults on reconnaissance or foraging trips. Women, too, played strategic roles, preparing supplies, managing household defenses, and organizing safe routes for children and livestock. Knowledge of terrain, hidden paths, river crossings, and natural cover was crucial, allowing communities to respond dynamically to both human and environmental threats. Family life, while structured around labor and survival, contained layers of subtle social dynamics. Multigenerational households blended authority, cooperation, and negotiation, balancing the needs of elders, adults, and children. Responsibilities were distributed according to age, strength, and expertise, yet conflicts over resources, authority, or interpersonal tensions were inevitable. Marriages were strategic as well as emotional, consolidating resources, strengthening alliances, and ensuring continuity of labor and protection. Affection existed alongside pragmatism, woven into the daily routines of work, care, and mutual support. Entertainment, creativity, and cultural expression persisted despite hardship. Music, storytelling, and games provided psychological sustenance, offering moments of joy, imagination, and communal connection. Children engaged in playful simulations of adult tasks, learning essential skills while enjoying moments of freedom. Oral storytelling preserved history, morality, and practical knowledge, embedding lessons within narratives that entertained and instructed simultaneously. Domestic rituals, preparing bread, tending fires, sharing meals, served as spaces for connection, reflection, and reinforcement of social bonds, sustaining both individual and collective resilience. Nature dictated rhythms and imposed limits, shaping every aspect of village life. Harsh winters brought frost, ice, and snow, threatening crops, livestock, and movement. Summer heat could parch fields, dry water sources, and expose vulnerabilities in both shelter and human endurance. Storms, floods, and other unpredictable events demanded constant vigilance and adaptive strategies. Villagers observed environmental cues, animal behavior, plant cycles, cloud formations, to anticipate change and respond effectively, integrating practical knowledge with spiritual interpretation. Through the interplay of labor, skill, observation, belief, and adaptation, the people of medieval Greece demonstrated remarkable resilience. Life was a continuous negotiation between immediate survival and long-term sustainability, shaped by craft, commerce, ritual, family, and community. Every task, story, or calculated risk contributed to the intricate mosaic of existence, reflecting the creativity, endurance, and subtle intelligence required to thrive in a world of relentless demands, uncertainty, and occasional moments of beauty and joy. Survival was not passive. It was an active, intricate process of learning, adaptation, and persistent hope, a testament to the extraordinary capacity of ordinary humans to endure and create meaning under the harshest conditions. In the villages of medieval Greece, life unfolded as an intricate choreography of labor, vigilance, and subtle social maneuvering, where every skill and observation contributed to survival. Craftspeople worked not only to sustain themselves, but to create networks of influence, reputation, and exchange. The blacksmith's forge rang with the steady rhythm of labor, each hammer strike shaping more than metal. It shaped the very fabric of the community. Tools, weapons, and household implements crafted with precision and care were silently evaluated by neighbors, visitors, and rival artisans. Carpenters perfected joints, beams, and carts, while weavers experimented with fibers, dyes, and patterns that communicated status, identity, or skill. Potters honed their clay into durable vessels, balancing practical utility with aesthetic nuance, their designs often serving as unspoken signatures recognizable across villages. Apprentices absorbed these skills through meticulous observation, learning not only technique but also the timing, rhythm, and intuition that distinguished mastery from mere labor. The constant threat of disease shaped every aspect of life, instilling both fear and cautious routine. Epidemics could decimate families, disrupt trade, and create long-term labor shortages. Villagers relied on herbal remedies, poultices, and prayers administered by midwives, wise women, or itinerant healers. The preparation of these treatments was as precise as any craft. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices carefully applied, and rituals performed to invoke divine protection. Families adapted quickly, isolating the sick, rationing food, and maintaining hygiene as best they could, all while integrating spiritual practices to offer hope and meaning. Even minor illnesses demanded attention, for neglect could escalate to deadly consequences, emphasizing the interconnectedness of health, labor, and survival strategies. Conflict and the looming threat of war dictated behavior, shaping everything from the architecture of homes to social roles. Villagers' fortified structures maintained lookout posts and coordinated defensive strategies. Men trained with spears, slings, and knives, while older boys practiced observation, reconnaissance, and tactical thinking. Women played crucial roles in planning, supply management, and household defense, ensuring that children, food, and livestock were protected during emergencies. Knowledge of the terrain, hidden pathways, river crossings, and natural cover became a critical advantage, allowing communities to maneuver, hide, or respond effectively to threats. Even routine activities, such as traveling to the market or tending distant fields, were conducted with caution, awareness, and strategy, a constant negotiation with uncertainty and danger. Family and social structures provided both stability and complexity. Multigenerational households relied on cooperation for survival, balancing labor, education, and care across age groups. Conflicts over authority, resources, or responsibilities were inevitable, yet tempered by necessity, as survival demanded collaboration. Marriages served multiple functions: emotional bonds, consolidation of labor, and strategic alliances, ensuring continuity and reinforcing community networks. Affection existed alongside pragmatic concerns, blending emotional resilience with practical necessities, a constant interplay that shaped relationships and household dynamics. Leisure, creativity, and ritual remained vital despite hardship. Music, storytelling, dance, and games offered psychological relief, social cohesion, and a framework for transmitting knowledge. Children engaged in play that mimicked adult labor, developing practical skills while enjoying freedom and imagination. Storytelling preserved history, ethics, and cultural knowledge, weaving practical lessons into entertaining narratives that reinforced communal identity. Simple domestic rituals, baking bread, tending fires, preparing meals, became intimate spaces for connection, reflection, and emotional sustenance, fostering resilience at both individual and communal levels. The natural world dictated rhythms, presented challenges, and shaped strategies. Winters brought snow, ice, and frozen fields that threatened crops, water, and shelter, while summers scorched land, stressed livestock, and created drought conditions. Storms, floods, and other environmental hazards demanded constant observation, adaptation, and foresight. Villagers read subtle signs, bird behavior, wind patterns, cloud formations, to anticipate change, blending practical knowledge with spiritual interpretation. Environmental awareness was inseparable from survival, integrating observation, intuition, and learned experience into daily life. Within these pressures, fear and joy intertwined. Fear was omnipresent, of illness, raiders, famine, or storm. Yet small moments of triumph and pleasure punctuated the routine. A successful harvest, the birth of a child, a well-crafted tool, or the completion of a communal project could elicit genuine joy. Music, dance, and storytelling offered brief but potent relief from the demands of labor and vigilance. Even seemingly mundane moments, sharing a meal, repairing a roof, tending animals, became opportunities for connection, learning, and quiet satisfaction. These experiences fostered psychological resilience, reinforcing the human capacity to adapt, endure, and find meaning in a demanding and unpredictable world. Through labor, craft, observation, belief, and communal interaction, medieval Greeks cultivated a life of remarkable adaptability. Every skill mastered, every risk calculated, every story told, and every ritual observed contributed to the intricate mosaic of survival. Life was not merely endured. It was actively negotiated, shaped, and imbued with significance, reflecting the extraordinary ingenuity, resilience, and emotional depth required to persist in a world of relentless challenge, uncertainty, and fleeting beauty. Life in medieval Greece unfolded as a delicate and continuous balance between routine and unpredictability, where every craft, conversation, and observation carried significance far beyond the immediate moment. Workshops were centers not only of labor but also of knowledge, strategy, and subtle competition. Blacksmiths labored over their forges, producing tools, weapons, and everyday implements. Yet each piece was also a measure of skill, reputation, and social influence. Carpenters refined not just the construction of homes and carts but techniques for efficiency, reinforcement, and innovation that could mean the difference between a structure surviving a storm or succumbing to it. Weavers experimented with threads, dyes, and patterns, sometimes encoding family symbols or messages into designs, while potters carefully molded clay into vessels whose durability and aesthetic appeal reflected both practical skill and communal identity. Apprentices learned through observation, imitation, and repetition, absorbing not only technique but the judgment and intuition that distinguished a master from a mere worker. Social strategy permeated daily interactions, from family dynamics to marketplace negotiations. Knowledge, information, and perception were as valuable as any commodity. A careful listener could detect approaching threats, glean trade advantages, or navigate conflicts between neighbors. Marketplaces were arenas where skillful observation, subtle persuasion, and timing influenced survival and prosperity. Children absorbed these lessons naturally, learning to interpret tone, gesture, and the nuances of human behavior, practicing their own forms of negotiation while running errands, weighing goods, or observing adult exchanges. Even small acts, sharing news, warning of danger, or demonstrating a subtle skill, strengthened social bonds and ensured the continuity of collective knowledge, reinforcing the importance of both personal acumen and community awareness. Spiritual and ritual life continued to offer structure, comfort, and guidance. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples provided spaces for offerings, prayers, and ceremonies, reinforcing moral frameworks, social cohesion, and the interpretation of misfortune. Seasonal festivals punctuated labor and survival, creating cycles of relief, reflection, and communal identity. Music, dance, and storytelling conveyed both cultural memory and practical lessons, integrating history, ethics, and entertainment. Lyres, flutes, and simple percussion instruments accompanied communal dances, while tales of gods, heroes, and cautionary events were performed to teach lessons about courage, prudence, and cooperation. These occasions, though brief, provided essential psychological respite, reinforcing bonds and reminding villagers of the beauty, joy, and continuity of life amidst pervasive hardship. Disease remained an ever-present threat, shaping behavior, strategy, and community organization. Epidemics could strike suddenly, claiming lives and leaving households with critical labor shortages. Midwives, herbalists, and traveling healers provided treatment with remedies that combined practical knowledge of local plants and traditional rituals. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices applied, prayers recited, charms worn. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed resources, and maintained hygiene, blending practical preparation with spiritual intervention. Even minor illnesses were taken seriously, teaching vigilance, patience, and the integration of health into broader strategies of survival. Conflict loomed as a constant possibility. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal buildings, while men trained with spears, slings, and knives. Older children learned observation, tracking, and rudimentary strategy, sometimes accompanying adults on reconnaissance trips or supply runs. Women contributed to defense planning, supply management, and child protection, organizing safe routes and emergency measures. Knowledge of the surrounding landscape, forests, hills, rivers, was a tactical advantage, providing both refuge and strategic positioning. Travel, even for routine errands, demanded caution, planning, and coordination, reflecting the omnipresent interplay between human skill and environmental awareness. Family life balanced structure with negotiation and adaptation. Multigenerational households required cooperation in labor, childcare, and care for the elderly, while authority and responsibilities were distributed according to age, strength, and expertise. Conflicts arose over resources, decision-making, or interpersonal tensions, but survival demanded compromise. Marriages were both emotional and strategic, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring household continuity and reinforcing broader social networks. Affection coexisted with pragmatic necessity, blending emotional bonds with the imperatives of survival. Joy and creative expression remained vital. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal festivities offered psychological relief, social cohesion, and a means of transmitting practical and cultural knowledge. Children simulated adult labor in play, honing skills while enjoying imagination and movement. Storytelling preserved memory, ethics, and instruction, embedding lessons within narratives entertaining enough to capture attention while imparting wisdom. Domestic routines, baking, cooking, tending fires, served as intimate spaces for reflection, education, and emotional support, sustaining individual and communal resilience in ways as crucial as material labor. Nature imposed both limits and lessons. Winters brought frost, ice, and frozen fields, testing shelter, labor, and endurance, while summers could scorch land, stress livestock, and strain water supplies. Storms, floods, and environmental hazards demanded vigilance and adaptive strategies. Villagers read cues in bird behavior, wind patterns, and plant cycles to anticipate challenges, blending practical knowledge with spiritual interpretation. The natural world was not passive. It dictated rhythms, presented dangers, and rewarded observation and adaptation, shaping every aspect of human activity. Within this constant negotiation of survival, fear and joy existed side by side. Fear arose from disease, conflict, famine, and environmental hazards, but joy punctuated daily life in small victories. A repaired roof, a successful harvest, a newborn child, or a well-crafted tool. Music, dance, and storytelling provided relief, reinforcing resilience and communal identity. Even simple moments, sharing meals, tending animals, repairing fences, offered opportunities for connection, reflection, and satisfaction, sustaining both body and spirit. Through labor, craft, observation, spirituality, and social acumen, the people of medieval Greece navigated a world of relentless challenge. Each skill mastered, risk calculated, and lesson learned contributed to the intricate mosaic of survival. Life was actively shaped, negotiated, and imbued with meaning, reflecting the ingenuity, perseverance, and resilience necessary to endure, adapt, and occasionally find beauty amidst hardship. Survival was never passive. It was a continuous, dynamic engagement with the world, a testament to the extraordinary capacities of ordinary humans living in a harsh and unpredictable landscape. Life in medieval Greece was a delicate web of labor, observation, strategy, and emotion, in which every decision, every interaction, and every skill contributed to the survival of both individuals and the community. Workshops pulsed with activity, where blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and potters labored with precision and care, Yet beneath the rhythm of routine lay subtle rivalries and intricate social dynamics. Blacksmiths competed silently, crafting stronger tools, sharper blades, and more reliable implements, while simultaneously exchanging techniques, warnings, or advice in hushed tones, creating a complex network of cooperation and rivalry. Carpenters experimented with innovative joinery or reinforced structures, balancing speed and durability to secure both reputation and practical success. Weavers experimented with threads and dyes, sometimes embedding family symbols, codes, or status markers within their patterns, their craft functioning as both practical skill and a medium of social communication. Apprentices absorbed not only technical skill but also these subtle lessons in negotiation, observation, and social intelligence, learning the unspoken rules that governed community respect and survival. Markets, fairs, and traveling merchants functioned as the lifeblood of social and economic networks, offering material goods, news, and critical information. Bartering required not only knowledge of value but a keen sense of timing, perception, and subtle psychological insight. Merchants carried stories from distant regions, rumors of conflict, new techniques, or natural disasters, which villagers interpreted and acted upon. A simple overheard conversation could reveal a potential shortage of grain, a looming raid, or an approaching epidemic, prompting careful planning and preparation. Children observed adults negotiating, weighing goods, or responding to social cues, gradually acquiring knowledge and strategic thinking necessary for adulthood. In these interactions, villagers learned that survival relied as much on understanding people as on physical skill or spiritual devotion. Religious and ritual life was deeply intertwined with these social and practical dynamics. Shrines, altars, and communal temples provided a space for offerings, prayers, and ceremonies, anchoring the community in shared belief. Seasonal festivals and feasts offered structured reprieves from labor, combining music, dance, and storytelling in celebrations that reinforced both cultural identity and moral instruction. Lyres, flutes, and percussion accompanied dances that mirrored the rhythm of agricultural cycles, while oral storytelling transmitted myths, historical events, and practical lessons on survival and cooperation. Even brief moments of shared celebration allowed villagers to refresh their spirits, reinforcing communal bonds and reminding them of beauty and joy in a harsh world. Disease remained a constant, unpredictable threat that shaped every aspect of life. Epidemics could devastate families and villages, leaving households bereft of labor and stability. Villagers relied on herbal remedies, poultices, and prayers administered by midwives, wise women, or traveling healers, blending practical and spiritual knowledge. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped into mixtures for fevers, infections, and wounds, while protective rituals or charms offered hope and psychological comfort. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed food, and maintained hygiene as best they could, creating a delicate balance between physical survival and emotional resilience. Even minor ailments were approached with caution, teaching vigilance, patience, and the necessity of integrating health into broader strategies of life. Conflict and the constant possibility of war required vigilance and ingenuity. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal buildings, maintaining defensive structures and lookout posts. Men trained with spears, slings, and knives, while older children learned observation, reconnaissance, and tactical thinking. Women played key roles in defense, supply management, and safeguarding children and livestock, often improvising escape routes or emergency measures. Knowledge of terrain, forests, rivers, hills, and hidden paths was essential for survival, enabling communities to anticipate, evade, or confront threats. Even routine activities like traveling to the market or tending distant fields demanded strategic planning and constant awareness, reflecting the omnipresence of danger and the necessity of preparation. Family and household life combined structure, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes required careful coordination of labor, childcare, and elder care, balancing authority, skill, and experience. Conflicts over resources, responsibilities, or interpersonal tensions were inevitable, but mitigated by the necessity of cooperation. Marriages served multiple purposes, emotional connection, consolidation of labor, reinforcement of alliances, and continuity of household and community structures. Affection coexisted with pragmatism, creating complex dynamics where survival and social cohesion depended on both emotional bonds and careful planning. Joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance persisted despite hardship. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations provided relief, nurtured imagination, and reinforced social cohesion. Children engaged in playful simulations of adult labor, acquiring practical skills while enjoying movement and creativity. Stories preserved historical knowledge, ethical lessons, and practical guidance, blending entertainment with education. Even routine domestic tasks, baking, cooking, repairing, or tending fires, offered moments of connection, reflection, and quiet satisfaction, sustaining both physical and emotional well-being. Nature dictated rhythms, tested resilience, and demanded adaptation. Winters brought frost, ice, and snow, threatening crops, water, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and exposure to storms. Villagers interpreted environmental cues, from bird behavior to wind patterns and plant cycles, blending practical observation with spiritual meaning. The landscape was both ally and adversary, offering resources, guidance, and challenges, shaping labor, movement, and strategic planning. Within this continuous negotiation, fear and joy existed side by side. Fear arose from disease, raids, famine, or environmental hazards, while joy appeared in small victories. A repaired roof, a bountiful harvest, a newborn child, or a skillfully crafted object. Music, dance, and communal storytelling reinforced resilience and shared identity. Even seemingly mundane moments, sharing meals, tending livestock, repairing structures, became opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional sustenance. Through labor, skill, observation, belief, and social strategy, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenge. Every task, story, ritual, and calculated decision contributed to a living mosaic of survival and resilience. Life was not merely endured. It was continuously negotiated, actively shaped, and imbued with meaning, demonstrating the extraordinary capacity of ordinary humans to persist, adapt, and occasionally find moments of beauty amidst hardship, uncertainty, and the constant demands of survival. In medieval Greece, life was a continuous dance between survival, observation, labor, and social negotiation, where even the smallest action could ripple across households, workshops, and villages. Craftsmanship was never merely functional. It was a language, a system of influence, and a measure of personal and communal prestige. Blacksmiths worked tirelessly at their forges, shaping iron into tools, weapons, and household items, each strike of the hammer resonating with purpose. Yet their labor was also a quiet competition, a subtle assertion of skill, reputation, and authority within the community. Carpenters honed structural techniques, reinforced beams, and refined joinery not just for utility but to demonstrate ingenuity and reliability, knowing that a well-crafted roof, cart, or ladder could save lives and earn respect. Weavers experimented with fibers, dyes, and patterns, encoding family emblems, social status, or practical symbols within the fabric itself, their craft functioning as both communication and survival. Apprentices absorbed these lessons slowly, through observation, practice, and the nuanced guidance of their mentors, learning the unspoken rules of skill, patience, and social standing. Markets and fairs were more than places to exchange goods. They were crucibles of information, subtle influence, and strategy. Merchants brought items and stories from distant lands, rumors of famine, approaching soldiers, new tools, or changes in political power. Villagers listened, interpreted, and acted, understanding that knowledge could be as valuable as grain or cloth. Bargaining was a skill honed from childhood, as children watched elders measure weight, assess quality, and read tone, gestures, and intention. Small exchanges, a whispered tip, a demonstration of technique, or an alert about danger, could ripple through the village, saving labor, livestock, or even lives. Understanding human behavior was as critical as understanding the land, for both were unpredictable, and the most cautious and observant often thrived where others struggled. Spiritual and ritual practices intertwined with these economic and social realities, offering guidance, structure, and psychological relief. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples provided spaces for offerings, prayers, and ceremonies, connecting villagers to forces beyond immediate perception. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and feasts punctuated the laborious cycle of life, combining music, dance, and storytelling into events that reinforced identity, ethics, and cooperation. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied dances that mirrored agricultural rhythms, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary events conveyed lessons in courage, prudence, and communal cohesion. These moments of shared experience, though brief, offered relief from labor, strengthened social bonds, and reminded villagers of the continuity and beauty of life, even amid hardship. Disease continued to cast its shadow over daily life. Epidemics could strike without warning, decimating families and threatening the labor base required for survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual practices were combined to fight illness, with midwives, wise women, and itinerant healers acting as both caregivers and advisors. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped into mixtures for fevers, wounds, or infections, while prayers, charms, and ritual gestures offered hope and psychological comfort. Families organized care, rationed resources, and maintained isolation when necessary, blending practical strategy with faith and resilience. Minor illnesses were treated with the same care, for even small missteps could escalate into fatal outcomes, reinforcing the constant vigilance and adaptability demanded by life. Conflict and the threat of violence required preparedness and strategy at every level. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal buildings, while men practiced combat skills with spears, slings, and knives. Older children learned observation, tracking, and reconnaissance, accompanying adults on essential tasks or preparing for potential threats. Women orchestrated supply management, emergency plans, and the protection of children and livestock, often improvising escape routes and hiding strategies. Knowledge of the surrounding landscape, forests, hills, rivers, and hidden paths was vital, allowing villages to evade or confront dangers, negotiate access to resources, and respond dynamically to shifting conditions. Even everyday activities, such as collecting water or tending distant fields, required caution, planning, and situational awareness. Family and household dynamics were complex, balancing cooperation, authority, and negotiation. Multigenerational households depended on shared labor, childcare, and elder care, with responsibilities allocated according to ability, knowledge, and experience. Conflicts arose naturally over resources, decision-making, or personal differences, but were tempered by the necessity of collective survival. Marriages served strategic as well as emotional purposes, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, while fostering continuity and social cohesion. Emotional bonds coexisted with pragmatism, shaping interactions and ensuring that households could adapt to changing circumstances. Moments of joy and creative expression were essential, providing psychological sustenance and reinforcing social cohesion. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered relief from constant labor and danger. Children simulated adult work and play, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination and social understanding. Storytelling preserved historical memory, moral lessons, and practical knowledge, integrating instruction with entertainment. Domestic routines, preparing food, repairing structures, tending fires, became intimate spaces for reflection, learning, and emotional replenishment, sustaining both individuals and the larger community. Nature imposed limits and dictated strategy, teaching vigilance and adaptability. Winters brought frost, ice, and frozen fields. Summers brought drought, heat, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, animal behavior, plant growth, wind patterns, to anticipate challenges and respond effectively. The landscape functioned simultaneously as ally and adversary, offering resources, refuge, and lessons, shaping every decision, movement, and activity. Fear and joy existed in a continuous interplay, each amplifying the other. Fear arose from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy emerged in small victories. A repaired roof, a successful harvest, a newborn child, or a skillfully crafted tool. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced resilience and identity. Even routine activities, sharing meals, tending animals, or repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional nourishment. Through labor, craft, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated an unpredictable world. Every decision, skill, story, and ritual contributed to the intricate mosaic of survival and resilience. Life was actively shaped, negotiated, and imbued with meaning, reflecting the ingenuity, perseverance, and adaptability of ordinary humans confronting extraordinary challenges, finding moments of beauty, and enduring amid relentless hardship. Life in medieval Greece was an intricate weave of survival, craft, social intelligence, and cultural expression, where every gesture, decision, and observation could influence both the immediate household and the wider community. Workshops were more than spaces for producing tools, clothing, and household items. They were arenas for subtle competition, knowledge transfer, and social negotiation. Blacksmiths worked tirelessly at their forges, striking iron with precision and rhythm, shaping not only metal but also their reputation. Each hammer blow resonated with skill and authority, silently demonstrating competence and reliability to neighbors and patrons. Carpenters refined joinery, reinforced beams, and built carts, bridges, and simple fortifications, each innovation carrying practical, social, and sometimes tactical significance. Weavers experimented with fibers, threads, and dyes, sometimes embedding symbolic patterns or family emblems within fabric, a subtle communication of identity, alliance, or skill. Apprentices learned more than technique. They absorbed lessons in observation, patience, timing, and the social nuances that defined mastery, understanding that skill alone was insufficient without insight into human behavior. Markets and fairs functioned as critical hubs, not only for trade but for social intelligence and strategy. Merchants brought goods, news, and rumors, offering information on crop yields, approaching soldiers, epidemics, and new tools or techniques. Villagers learned to interpret, filter, and act on this information, realizing that perception and awareness could be as valuable as material goods. Negotiation required observation, timing, and psychological insight. Children learned early to read gestures, tone, and body language, honing skills that could later ensure survival and prosperity. Even casual exchanges, an overheard warning, a tip about market prices, or a demonstration of craft, rippled through the community, affecting labor allocation, trade decisions, and defensive planning. Knowledge, subtlety, and awareness were as indispensable as physical labor, a reminder that survival depended on both intellect and skill. Religious and ritual life provided continuity, guidance, and psychological sustenance. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples offered spaces for prayer, offerings, and ceremonies, anchoring individuals within shared moral, ethical, and spiritual frameworks. Seasonal festivals and feasts marked cycles of labor, harvest, and survival, blending music, dance, and storytelling into communal celebrations that reinforced cohesion, identity, and morality. Instruments like lyres, flutes, and percussion accompanied dances reflecting agricultural rhythms, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary tales imparted practical and ethical lessons. Even brief moments of collective celebration allowed villagers to recharge, strengthening bonds and reminding them of beauty, joy, and continuity amid hardship. Epidemics were an ever-present shadow over daily life, shaping decisions, labor allocation, and social organization. Disease could decimate families, disrupt trade, and reduce the labor pool essential for survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual rituals were combined in treatments administered by midwives, wise women, and itinerant healers. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices applied, and charms worn, all accompanied by prayers or ritual gestures that provided both practical effect and psychological reassurance. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed food, and maintained hygiene as best they could, blending strategy with faith and hope. Even minor illnesses were approached cautiously, for missteps could escalate into life-threatening consequences, emphasizing the constant vigilance and adaptability required by life. Conflict, whether from raiders, rival lords, or political turmoil, shaped every aspect of preparation and behavior. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal buildings, trained in the use of spears, slings, and knives, and established lookout systems. Older children learned observation, tracking, and tactical awareness, often accompanying adults on reconnaissance or foraging missions. Women managed supplies, coordinated emergency plans, and protected children and livestock, improvising escape routes or hidden shelters. Knowledge of terrain, forests, rivers, hills, and hidden paths was critical, providing strategic advantage in both defense and resource gathering. Even ordinary activities, such as collecting water, tending fields, or traveling to markets, required caution, planning, and awareness, reflecting the omnipresence of danger in everyday life. Household dynamics combined structure, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes required cooperation in labor, childcare, and elder care, with authority distributed according to age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over resources or responsibilities were inevitable but tempered by necessity, as cooperation was vital for survival. Marriages were both emotional and strategic, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances while ensuring continuity and reinforcing social networks. Affection coexisted with pragmatism, creating complex interpersonal dynamics where survival and social cohesion depended on both emotional bonds and strategic thinking. Moments of joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance were essential in an otherwise demanding environment. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations provided relief, social cohesion, and opportunities for learning. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult labor, acquiring skills while enjoying freedom and imagination. Stories preserved historical memory, ethics, and practical guidance, blending entertainment with instruction. Domestic routines, preparing food, repairing tools, tending fires, offered intimate spaces for reflection, teaching, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience at both individual and communal levels. Nature imposed constant limits and lessons, shaping both labor and strategy. Winters brought frost, ice, and snow, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought drought, heat, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, bird behavior, plant cycles, wind patterns, to anticipate challenges and respond effectively. The natural world was simultaneously ally and adversary, providing resources, guidance, and peril, influencing every decision, movement, and action. Fear and joy coexisted in a continuous interplay, reinforcing vigilance, resilience, and social cohesion. Fear emerged from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy appeared in small victories. Repaired roofs, bountiful harvests, newborn children, or successfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced communal identity and psychological endurance. Even simple acts, sharing meals, tending animals, or repairing structures, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through labor, craft, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenge. Every skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to the complex mosaic of survival. Life was actively shaped, continuously negotiated, and imbued with meaning, reflecting human ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience in the face of hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of beauty. In medieval Greece, life moved with a rhythm dictated by survival, labor, and the subtle interplay of social, environmental, and spiritual forces, where every decision, every observation, and every skill carried significance far beyond the immediate moment. Workshops and forges were vibrant centers of not just production but social negotiation and reputation building. Blacksmiths struck iron with precision and intent, producing tools, weapons, and household items, each object a testament to skill, patience, and social positioning. The rhythm of the hammer, the glow of molten metal, and the keen judgment required to shape it all reflected a delicate balance between technical mastery and social influence. Carpenters worked with wood, creating beams, furniture, and carts, while simultaneously demonstrating innovation, reliability, and problem-solving that could determine both safety and standing within the village. Weavers experimented with threads, fibers, and dyes, sometimes encoding symbols of family lineage, status, or alliances within their designs, transforming fabric into a medium of communication and subtle influence. Apprentices learned by observing, imitating, and gradually internalizing not just technical skill but the judgment, timing, and social awareness that distinguished true mastery from mere labor. Markets, fairs, and traveling merchants served as critical nodes of information and strategy, not just commerce. Merchants carried news of distant villages, conflicts, changing political dynamics, innovations, and environmental conditions. Villagers learned to filter, interpret, and act upon this information, understanding that knowledge could be as valuable as grain, livestock, or tools. Negotiation required keen perception, psychological acuity, and precise timing. Children absorbed these lessons by watching, listening, and gradually practicing observation, learning to recognize subtle cues in tone, gesture, and behavior that could influence outcomes. Even casual exchanges, a whispered warning, a demonstration of technique, or a discussion about trade routes, could ripple through the village, affecting labor allocation, safety measures, and long-term planning. Awareness and judgment were as essential as physical skill, emphasizing the integration of intellect, perception, and social understanding into daily survival. Religious and ritual life provided both structure and resilience, offering moral, social, and psychological guidance. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples offered spaces for offerings, prayers, and ceremonies, anchoring individuals within shared ethical and spiritual frameworks. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and communal feasts punctuated the arduous cycles of labor, providing both respite and reinforcement of cultural identity. Music, dance, and storytelling blended pleasure with instruction, embedding moral lessons, historical memory, and practical advice into entertainment. Lyres, flutes, and percussion accompanied dances mirroring agricultural cycles, while tales of gods, heroes, and cautionary events illustrated courage, prudence, and cooperation. These events, brief as they might be, offered psychological relief, strengthened social bonds, and reminded villagers of continuity, beauty, and joy amid hardship. Disease and epidemics cast persistent shadows over life, influencing labor, social organization, and domestic strategy. Illness could strike suddenly, decimating families, reducing available labor, and threatening survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual rituals combined practical and psychological approaches to treatment. Midwives, wise women, and traveling healers administered mixtures, charms, and prayers with careful knowledge of herbs, doses, and timing. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed resources, and maintained hygiene, balancing pragmatic necessity with hope and faith. Even minor ailments were treated with vigilance, for a small misstep could escalate into fatal consequences, highlighting the constant need for observation, knowledge, and adaptation. Conflict and the threat of violence required preparation, strategy, and vigilance. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal spaces, trained in the use of spears, slings, and knives, and maintained lookout systems. Older children learned observation, tracking, and reconnaissance, accompanying adults on essential tasks or defensive missions. Women played crucial roles in supply management, emergency planning, and the protection of children and livestock, improvising shelters, escape routes, or safe paths through difficult terrain. Knowledge of the surrounding landscape, Forests, rivers, hills, and hidden paths offered tactical advantage, allowing the community to evade threats, manage resources, and respond effectively to unpredictable circumstances. Even routine chores like gathering water, tending distant fields, or traveling to markets required vigilance, planning, and situational awareness. Household life was a delicate balance of structure, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes coordinated labor, childcare, and elder care, distributing responsibilities according to age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over resources, authority, or personal dynamics were natural but mitigated by necessity, as cooperation was essential for survival. Marriages were both strategic and emotional, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring household continuity and reinforcing broader social networks. Affection coexisted with practicality, creating nuanced relationships where emotional bonds, strategic thinking, and communal survival were inextricably linked. Joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance were indispensable, providing relief and reinforcing social cohesion. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered respite from labor, danger, and routine. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult work, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination, observation, and social understanding. Storytelling preserved history, ethics, and practical knowledge, blending instruction with entertainment. Even routine domestic tasks, cooking, repairing structures, tending fires, became spaces for reflection, learning, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience and social cohesion. Nature dictated both limits and lessons. Winters brought frost, ice, and snow, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and storms. Villagers learned to read environmental cues, animal behavior, plant cycles, cloud formations, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges and adapt. The natural world functioned as both ally and adversary, providing resources, refuge, and peril, shaping decisions, movement, and survival strategies. Fear and joy coexisted, reinforcing resilience and vigilance. Fear arose from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy emerged from small victories. Repaired structures, successful harvests, the birth of children, or skillfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced identity, psychological endurance, and communal bonds. Even the most routine actions, sharing meals, tending livestock, or repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through labor, craft, observation, ritual, and strategy, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenge. Each skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to a mosaic of survival and resilience. Life was actively shaped, negotiated, and imbued with meaning, reflecting the ingenuity, adaptability, and enduring human spirit amid constant hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of beauty. Life in medieval Greece was a constant negotiation between survival, labor, social dynamics, and the subtle forces of nature and culture, where every moment demanded attention, skill, and strategy. Workshops, forges, and craft spaces were centers not only of production but of learning, influence, and quiet rivalry. Blacksmiths struck iron with deliberate precision, producing tools, weapons, and everyday items that were simultaneously functional, symbolic, and status-bearing. Each object was a testament to skill, patience, and social standing, and the rhythm of the forge echoed with both labor and communication. Carpenters shaped wood into beams, furniture, carts, and simple fortifications, blending utility with ingenuity and demonstrating reliability, dexterity, and subtle authority. Weavers manipulated threads, fibers, and dyes, often embedding symbolic patterns, family emblems, or coded messages within their work, transforming cloth into a medium of communication and influence. Apprentices absorbed lessons in observation, repetition, timing, and social awareness, learning that technical skill alone could not guarantee mastery without understanding human behavior, negotiation, and reputation. Markets and fairs were central to both survival and the exchange of knowledge. Merchants brought goods, news, and rumors from distant regions, offering information on crop yields, political shifts, raids, innovations, or disease outbreaks. Villagers interpreted this information with care, knowing that perception, timing, and insight could be as critical as labor or resources. Negotiation involved keen observation, psychological acuity, and precise timing, skills that children began acquiring by watching adults navigate complex exchanges. A whispered tip, a demonstration of craft, or a subtle warning could ripple through the community, shaping labor allocation, trade decisions, and defensive measures. Knowledge and awareness were as essential as physical effort, reminding villagers that intellect and perception were as vital to survival as hands and tools. Religious and ritual life provided guidance, structure, and psychological sustenance, embedding ethics, history, and social cohesion into daily life. Shrines, altars, and communal temples offered spaces for prayer, offerings, and ceremonies, anchoring individuals within shared moral and spiritual frameworks. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and communal feasts punctuated laborious routines, blending music, dance, and storytelling into events that reinforced identity, ethics, and cooperation. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied dances that mirrored agricultural cycles, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary events conveyed lessons about courage, prudence, and collaboration. Even brief moments of collective celebration offered relief, strengthened social bonds, and reminded villagers of beauty, joy, and continuity amid adversity. Epidemics remained a constant shadow over daily life, influencing decisions, labor, and social organization. Illness could strike suddenly, decimating families and reducing the labor force essential for survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual practices were combined, administered by midwives, wise women, and itinerant healers. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices applied, and charms worn, all accompanied by prayers or ritual gestures that provided both practical effect and psychological reassurance. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed resources, and maintained hygiene, blending strategy with faith and resilience. Even minor illnesses were approached with caution, as small missteps could escalate into fatal consequences, reinforcing the necessity of vigilance, knowledge, and adaptability. Conflict and the ever-present threat of violence required preparation, strategy, and constant vigilance. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal spaces, trained in the use of spears, slings, and knives, and maintained lookout systems. Older children learned tracking, observation, and reconnaissance, often accompanying adults on foraging or defensive missions. Women played essential roles in managing supplies, coordinating emergency plans, and protecting children and livestock, improvising shelters, escape routes, or safe paths through difficult terrain. Knowledge of the surrounding landscape, forests, rivers, hills, and hidden paths was vital for tactical advantage, allowing communities to evade threats, manage resources, and respond effectively to unforeseen challenges. Even mundane activities like collecting water, tending distant fields, or traveling to market required caution, planning, and situational awareness, reflecting the omnipresence of danger in everyday life. Household dynamics required structure, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes coordinated labor, childcare, and elder care, distributing responsibilities according to age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over resources, authority, or personal tension were natural but tempered by necessity, as cooperation was essential for survival. Marriages were both strategic and emotional, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring household continuity and reinforcing broader social networks. Emotional bonds coexisted with practical necessity, creating nuanced relationships in which survival, strategy, and communal cohesion were intertwined. Moments of joy, creativity, and psychological relief were vital for resilience. Music, Storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered respite, social cohesion, and learning opportunities. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult work, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination, observation, and social understanding. Stories preserved history, ethics, and practical knowledge, blending instruction with entertainment. Even routine domestic tasks, preparing meals, repairing tools, tending fires, became spaces for reflection, skill building, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience at both individual and communal levels. Nature imposed limits, lessons, and opportunities. Winters brought frost, ice, and snow, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, animal behavior, plant cycles, cloud formations, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges and adapt accordingly. The natural world acted as both ally and adversary, offering resources, refuge, and peril, shaping every decision, movement, and survival strategy. Fear and joy existed in a constant interplay, reinforcing vigilance, resilience, and social cohesion. Fear arose from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy emerged in small victories. Repaired structures, successful harvests, newborn children, or skillfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced identity, psychological endurance, and communal bonds. Even routine acts, sharing meals, tending animals, or repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through craft, labor, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenges. Each skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to a complex mosaic of survival and resilience. Life was actively shaped, continuously negotiated, and imbued with meaning, reflecting human ingenuity, adaptability, and enduring spirit in the face of hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of beauty. Life in medieval Greece was a constant balance between survival, skill, social navigation, and the demands of both nature and culture, where every moment carried consequences for households, workshops, and the broader community. Craftsmanship was not merely a means of production but a language of influence, reputation, and subtle negotiation. Blacksmiths labored at forges, shaping iron into tools, weapons, and domestic items, each piece reflecting skill, patience, and social position. The rhythm of hammer on metal resonated with intention, demonstrating both technical mastery and a quiet assertion of authority within the village. Carpenters worked meticulously with wood, building furniture, beams, carts, and simple fortifications, each innovation reflecting ingenuity, precision, and social reliability. Weavers manipulated fibers, threads, and dyes, sometimes embedding family symbols, status indicators, or coded messages within their patterns, transforming cloth into a medium of communication, prestige, and strategic influence. Apprentices learned through observation, imitation, and gradual mastery, absorbing not only technical skill but the subtleties of timing, judgment, and social awareness, understanding that reputation and perception were inseparable from competence. Markets, fairs, and traveling merchants were critical hubs for trade, social intelligence, and strategic planning. Merchants brought news of distant villages, military movements, epidemics, innovations, and environmental conditions, requiring villagers to interpret and act upon information with care. Knowledge and awareness could be as valuable as grain, livestock, or tools, shaping labor allocation, defensive measures, and household strategy. Negotiation demanded keen perception, subtle timing, and psychological insight, and children learned these lessons by observing adults navigating complex exchanges. A whispered tip, a shared observation, or a subtle demonstration of skill could ripple through the community, influencing decisions, alliances, and survival outcomes. Awareness and insight were as essential as physical labor, emphasizing the integration of intellect, perception, and social navigation into daily survival. Religious and ritual life provided guidance, cohesion, and psychological resilience. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples offered spaces for prayer, offerings, and ceremonies, grounding individuals in shared ethical, spiritual, and cultural frameworks. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and communal feasts punctuated daily toil, blending music, dance, and storytelling into events that reinforced identity, morality, and cooperative bonds. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied dances that mirrored agricultural and social rhythms, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary events imparted lessons on courage, prudence, and collaboration. Even brief moments of celebration offered relief, strengthened social bonds, and reminded villagers of beauty, joy, and continuity amid the hardships of life. Epidemics cast an omnipresent shadow, shaping labor, domestic strategy, and social behavior. Disease could strike suddenly, devastating families and reducing the workforce necessary for survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual practices were combined, administered by midwives, wise women, and itinerant healers. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped. Poultices were applied, and charms worn, accompanied by prayers or ritual gestures offering both practical benefit and psychological comfort. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed food, and maintained hygiene, blending practical strategy with hope and faith. Even minor illnesses were treated with vigilance, for small miscalculations could escalate into life-threatening consequences, reinforcing the constant need for observation, knowledge, and adaptability. Conflict and the threat of violence demanded preparation, strategy, and constant vigilance. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal structures, trained with spears, slings, and knives, and maintained lookout systems. Older children learned tracking, reconnaissance, and situational awareness, often accompanying adults on defensive or foraging missions. Women orchestrated supply management, emergency planning, and the protection of children and livestock, improvising shelters, escape routes, and hidden passages when necessary. Knowledge of terrain, forests, rivers, hills, and concealed paths offered strategic advantage, allowing the community to evade threats, manage resources, and respond effectively to unpredictable circumstances. Even mundane activities, such as collecting water, tending distant fields, or traveling to market, required vigilance, planning, and strategic thinking. Household life demanded a balance of structure, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes coordinated labor, childcare, and elder care, distributing responsibilities according to age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over authority, resources, or personal tensions were natural but mitigated by necessity, as cooperation was critical for survival. Marriages were both strategic and emotional, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring continuity and reinforcing social networks. Emotional bonds coexisted with practical necessity, creating nuanced relationships where survival, strategy, and community cohesion were inseparable. Joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance were essential for resilience. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered relief from labor, danger, and routine, fostering both pleasure and learning. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult labor, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination, observation, and social understanding. Stories preserved historical memory, ethics, and practical knowledge, blending instruction with entertainment. Routine domestic tasks, preparing meals, repairing tools, tending fires, became spaces for reflection, skill building, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience at both individual and communal levels. Nature dictated both limits and lessons. Winters brought frost, snow, and ice, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, bird activity, plant cycles, cloud formations, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges and respond effectively. The natural world functioned as both ally and adversary, providing resources, refuge, and peril, shaping decisions, movement, and survival strategies. Fear and joy coexisted, reinforcing vigilance, resilience, and social cohesion. Fear emerged from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy appeared in small victories. Repaired structures, successful harvests, newborn children, or skillfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced identity, psychological endurance, and communal bonds. Even routine actions, sharing meals, tending animals, or repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through craft, labor, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenge. Every skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to a complex mosaic of survival and resilience. Life was actively shaped, continuously negotiated, and imbued with meaning, reflecting human ingenuity, adaptability, and enduring spirit amid hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of beauty. Life in medieval Greece unfolded as a complex, continuous negotiation between survival, craft, social awareness, and environmental pressures, where every gesture, skill, and decision carried weight for households, workshops, and the broader village. Craftsmanship was a language of both necessity and prestige, embedding practical value, social influence, and cultural identity within every tool, weapon, and piece of fabric. Blacksmiths labored at glowing forges, striking iron with precision and intention, producing tools, weapons, and domestic items that reflected both technical skill and social standing. Each hammer strike resonated as a measure of patience, competence, and reputation, conveying mastery in a world where trust, skill, and timing determined survival. Carpenters shaped wood into furniture, beams, carts, and simple fortifications, blending functionality with innovation, subtly asserting reliability, ingenuity, and authority. Weavers worked threads, fibers, and dyes into patterns that could encode family symbols, alliances, or social cues, transforming everyday cloth into a medium of communication and subtle influence. Apprentices absorbed these lessons through observation, imitation, and gradual hands-on practice, internalizing not only technical skill but the judgment, timing, and social intelligence essential to both reputation and survival. Markets, fairs, and itinerant merchants were far more than centers of trade. They were hubs of information, strategy, and social negotiation. Merchants carried news of distant villages, approaching armies, disease outbreaks, technological innovations, and environmental changes. Villagers had to filter, interpret, and act on these streams of information carefully, understanding that insight and awareness could be as vital as grain, livestock, or tools. Negotiation involved precise perception, psychological acuity, and timing. Children learned by observing adults, gradually mastering the subtle cues and tactics that determined outcomes. A whispered warning, a skillful demonstration, or a small shared observation could ripple through the village, influencing labor allocation, defensive strategies, and long-term planning. Knowledge and awareness were inseparable from labor, skill, and survival, creating a continuous interplay between intellect, perception, and physical effort. Religious and ritual life provided structure, guidance, and psychological sustenance, embedding ethical norms, historical memory, and communal identity within daily life. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples offered spaces for prayer, offerings, and ceremonial gatherings, anchoring individuals in shared moral and spiritual frameworks. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and communal feasts punctuated cycles of labor, blending music, dance, and storytelling into events that reinforced cohesion, identity, and cooperative bonds. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied dances mirroring agricultural and social rhythms, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary legends imparted lessons on prudence, courage, and communal cooperation. Even brief moments of celebration offered relief from labor, reinforced social bonds, and reminded villagers of continuity, beauty, and joy amidst the challenges of life. Epidemics and illness were constant threats, shaping labor, domestic routines, and social behavior. Disease could strike suddenly, decimating families, reducing available labor, and threatening survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual rituals were combined, administered by midwives, wise women, and traveling healers. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices applied, charms worn, all accompanied by prayers or ritual gestures to provide practical effect and psychological reassurance. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed food, and maintained hygiene as best they could, blending pragmatic strategy with faith and hope. Even minor ailments were treated cautiously, for missteps could escalate into fatal consequences, reinforcing vigilance, knowledge, and adaptability. Conflict and the ever-present threat of violence demanded preparation, strategy, and constant awareness. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal buildings, trained in the use of spears, slings, and knives, and maintained lookout systems. Older children learned observation, tracking, and reconnaissance, often accompanying adults on defensive or foraging missions. Women orchestrated supply management, emergency planning, and protection of children and livestock, improvising shelters, escape routes, and hidden passages. Knowledge of the surrounding terrain, forests, rivers, hills, and secret paths offered tactical advantage, enabling the community to evade danger, manage resources, and respond effectively to unpredictable circumstances. Even routine tasks like gathering water, tending distant fields, or traveling to market demanded vigilance, planning, and situational intelligence, reflecting the omnipresence of danger in daily life. Household dynamics combine structure, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes coordinated labor, childcare, and elder care, allocating responsibilities based on age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over authority, resources, or personal tensions were inevitable but mitigated by necessity, as cooperation was crucial for survival. Marriages were both strategic and emotional, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring continuity and reinforcing broader social networks. Emotional bonds coexisted with practical necessity, creating nuanced relationships where survival, strategy, and communal cohesion were inseparable. Joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance were vital, providing relief and reinforcing resilience. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered both pleasure and education. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult work, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination, observation, and social understanding. Stories preserved history, ethics, and practical knowledge, blending instruction with entertainment. Routine domestic tasks, preparing meals, repairing tools, tending fires, became opportunities for reflection, skill building, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience at individual and communal levels. Nature imposed limits, lessons, and opportunities. Winters brought frost, snow, and ice, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, bird behavior, plant cycles, cloud formations, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges and adapt. The natural world functioned simultaneously as ally and adversary, shaping decisions, movement, and survival strategies. Fear and joy coexisted, reinforcing vigilance, resilience, and social cohesion. Fear arose from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy emerged in small victories. Repaired homes, successful harvests, newborn children, or skillfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced identity, psychological endurance, and communal bonds. Even routine acts, sharing meals, tending animals, or repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through craft, labor, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenge. Each skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to the intricate mosaic of survival, resilience, and meaning. Life was actively shaped, continuously negotiated, and imbued with significance, reflecting human ingenuity, adaptability, an enduring spirit amidst constant hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting glimpses of beauty. Life in medieval Greece was defined by a constant interplay of survival, labor, social maneuvering, and the unpredictable forces of nature, where every action, observation, and skill contributed to the delicate balance between prosperity and disaster. The world of craft and labor was central not only to survival but also to status, influence, and identity. Blacksmiths worked at the forge, shaping iron into tools, weapons, and domestic objects, each item a reflection of technical mastery, precision, and social standing. The rhythmic hammering against heated metal was not only a test of endurance and skill, but also a subtle assertion of authority, demonstrating reliability, patience, and expertise to all who observed. Carpenters shaped wood into furniture, beams, carts, and defensive structures, blending practicality with ingenuity and subtly asserting their social importance. Weavers intertwined threads, fibers, and dyes, often embedding symbolic patterns, family crests, or subtle social cues within their textiles, transforming everyday cloth into a vehicle of communication, prestige, and influence. Apprentices absorbed these lessons through close observation and hands-on practice, gradually mastering not only the technical skills but also the social awareness, judgment, and timing required to gain recognition and secure a place in the intricate social fabric. Markets and fairs served as much more than centers of commerce. They were hubs of intelligence, strategy, and negotiation. Merchants carried news of distant regions, shifting political landscapes, approaching armies, disease outbreaks, technological innovations, and environmental changes. Villagers learned to filter, interpret, and respond to this information carefully, knowing that insight and situational awareness could be as vital as food, tools, or livestock. Negotiation demanded careful perception, psychological insight, and timing, lessons absorbed by children through observation and participation in minor exchanges. A whispered warning, a shared observation, or a subtle demonstration of skill could ripple through the village, influencing labor distribution, defensive measures, and longer-term planning. Knowledge and social awareness were as essential as physical labor, underscoring the integration of intellect and perception into everyday survival. Religious and ritual life offered guidance, cohesion, and psychological resilience. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples provided spaces for prayer, offerings, and ceremonies, grounding individuals in shared ethical, spiritual, and cultural frameworks. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and communal feasts punctuated laborious routines, blending music, dance, and storytelling into moments that reinforced identity, social bonds, and cooperation. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied dances that mirrored agricultural and social cycles, while stories of gods, heroes, and cautionary legends imparted lessons about courage, prudence, and collaboration. Even brief communal celebrations offered relief, strengthened social cohesion, and reminded villagers of continuity, beauty, and joy amidst hardship. Epidemics remained a constant threat, shaping domestic strategies, labor allocation, and social behavior. Disease could strike suddenly, devastating families, reducing labor availability, and threatening survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual rituals were combined, administered by midwives, wise women, and traveling healers. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices applied, charms worn, all accompanied by prayers or ritual gestures to provide both practical benefit and psychological reassurance. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed resources, and maintained hygiene as best they could, blending pragmatic strategy with hope and faith. Even minor ailments were treated with vigilance, for small errors could escalate into fatal consequences, reinforcing constant observation, knowledge, and adaptability. Conflict and the threat of violence demanded vigilance, preparation, and strategic thinking. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal buildings, trained in the use of spears, slings, and knives, and maintained lookout systems. Older children learned tracking, reconnaissance, and situational awareness, often accompanying adults on defensive or foraging missions. Women orchestrated supply management, emergency planning, and protection of children and livestock, improvising shelters, escape routes, and hidden passages. Knowledge of the surrounding landscape, forests, rivers, hills, and concealed paths offered tactical advantage, allowing the community to evade threats, manage resources, and respond effectively to unforeseen challenges. Even routine tasks, such as fetching water, tending distant fields, or traveling to market, required planning, vigilance, and situational intelligence, reflecting the omnipresent danger of daily life. Household dynamics demanded coordination, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes distributed labor, childcare, and elder care according to age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over authority, resources, or personal tension were natural but tempered by necessity, as cooperation was critical for survival. Marriages were both strategic and emotional, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring continuity and reinforcing broader social networks. Emotional bonds coexisted with practical necessity, creating nuanced relationships where survival, strategy, and communal cohesion were inseparable. Joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance were essential for resilience. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered relief, reinforced cohesion, and provided learning opportunities. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult work, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination, observation, and social understanding. Stories preserved history, ethics, and practical knowledge, blending instruction with entertainment. Routine domestic tasks, preparing meals, repairing tools, tending fires, became spaces for reflection, skill building, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience at both individual and communal levels. Nature imposed constant limits, lessons, and opportunities. Winters brought frost, snow, and ice, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, animal behavior, plant cycles, cloud formations, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges and adapt. The natural world functioned simultaneously as ally and adversary, shaping every decision, movement, and strategy of survival. Fear and joy coexisted in a delicate balance, reinforcing vigilance, resilience, and social cohesion. Fear emerged from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy appeared in small victories. Repaired homes, successful harvests, newborn children, or skillfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced communal identity, psychological endurance, and social bonds. Even the most routine acts, sharing meals, tending livestock, repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through craft, labor, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated a world of relentless challenge. Every skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to a living mosaic of survival, resilience, and meaning. Life was actively shaped, continuously negotiated, and imbued with significance, reflecting human ingenuity, adaptability, and enduring spirit amid hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting glimpses of beauty. Life in medieval Greece was an unbroken continuum of labor, observation, negotiation, and adaptation, where every action, choice, and skill could ripple across families, villages, and generations. Craftsmen labored with intensity and precision, yet their work extended beyond mere production. It was a medium of social signaling, strategic influence, and cultural identity. Blacksmiths struck iron at forges glowing with molten heat, shaping not only tools, weapons, and domestic items but also the respect, trust, and authority they commanded within the village. Every strike of the hammer carried both practical and symbolic weight, signaling competence, reliability, and the subtle assertion of status. Carpenters shaped wood into beams, carts, furniture, and defensive structures, blending utility, innovation, and social influence. Even minor adjustments in design, alignment, or finish could reflect ingenuity or caution, affecting not just the final product but the community's perception of skill and foresight. Weavers intertwined threads, fibers, and dyes, producing textiles that often bore encoded symbols of lineage, alliances, or social rank, transforming cloth into a language understood by those attuned to its subtle patterns. Apprentices absorbed lessons not only in technique but in judgment, timing, and perception, learning that mastery demanded intelligence, observation, and social acuity as much as physical skill. Markets, fairs, and traveling merchants were far more than centers of commerce. They were vital hubs of information, strategy, and subtle negotiation. Merchants brought news of distant villages, shifts in political power, approaching armies, disease outbreaks, innovations, and environmental changes. Villagers interpreted these messages carefully, understanding that insight could be as vital as food, livestock, or tools. Negotiation required perception, patience, and psychological understanding, and children learned these lessons through observation, gradually mastering cues, timing, and tactics. A whispered tip, an exchanged secret, or a carefully demonstrated skill could ripple through the village, influencing labor allocation, defense strategies, and long-term planning. Knowledge and social intelligence were inseparable from labor and skill, creating a continuous interplay between intellect, perception, and effort. Religion and ritual offered structure, guidance, and psychological sustenance. Shrines, household altars, and communal temples provided spaces for prayer, offerings, and ceremonies, grounding individuals in shared moral and spiritual frameworks. Seasonal festivals, harvest celebrations, and communal feasts punctuated cycles of labor, blending music, dance, and storytelling into events that reinforced identity, ethics, and cooperation. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied dances reflecting agricultural cycles, while tales of gods, heroes, and cautionary figures taught lessons on prudence, courage, and collaboration. Even brief communal gatherings offered respite from labor, reinforced social cohesion, and reminded villagers of continuity, beauty, and fleeting moments of joy amidst hardship. Epidemics and illness shaped labor, domestic routines, and social behavior. Disease could strike suddenly, decimating families and labor forces essential to survival. Herbal remedies, poultices, and spiritual practices were combined, administered by midwives, wise women, and traveling healers. Herbs were crushed, boiled, or steeped, poultices applied, charms worn, accompanied by prayers or ritual gestures offering both practical and psychological benefit. Families coordinated care, isolated the sick, rationed resources, and maintained hygiene, blending pragmatic strategy with hope and faith. Even minor illnesses were treated with vigilance, for small mistakes could escalate into fatal consequences, reinforcing the need for observation, knowledge, and adaptability. Conflict and threats of violence demanded vigilance, preparation, and strategic thinking. Villagers fortified homes, barns, and communal structures, trained with spears, slings, and knives, and maintained lookout systems. Older children learned tracking, reconnaissance, and situational awareness, often accompanying adults on defensive or foraging missions. Women coordinated supply management, emergency planning, and protection of children and livestock, improvising shelters, escape routes, and concealed passages. Knowledge of terrain, forests, rivers, hills, and hidden paths offered tactical advantage, allowing communities to evade threats, manage resources, and respond effectively to unpredictable dangers. Even routine tasks like fetching water, tending distant fields, or traveling to markets required careful planning, vigilance, and situational intelligence. Household life demanded organization, negotiation, and adaptability. Multigenerational homes distributed labor, childcare, and elder care based on age, skill, and experience. Conflicts over authority, resources, or personal tension were natural but mitigated by necessity, as cooperation was essential for survival. Marriages were both strategic and emotional, consolidating labor, resources, and alliances, ensuring continuity and reinforcing social networks. Emotional bonds coexisted with practical necessity, creating nuanced relationships where survival, strategy, and communal cohesion were inseparable. Joy, creativity, and psychological sustenance were critical. Music, storytelling, games, and seasonal celebrations offered relief, learning, and cohesion. Children engaged in playful imitation of adult work, acquiring practical skills while nurturing imagination, observation, and social understanding. Stories preserved history, ethics, and practical knowledge, blending instruction with entertainment. Routine domestic tasks, preparing meals, repairing tools, tending fires, became spaces for reflection, skill building, and emotional replenishment, sustaining resilience at individual and communal levels. Nature imposed limits, lessons, and opportunities. Winters brought frost, snow, and ice, threatening crops, livestock, and shelter, while summers brought heat, drought, and storms. Villagers observed environmental cues, animal behavior, plant cycles, cloud formations, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges and adapt. The natural world functioned simultaneously as ally and adversary, shaping every decision, movement, and strategy. Fear and joy coexisted in a delicate equilibrium, reinforcing vigilance, resilience, and social cohesion. Fear arose from disease, famine, raids, or environmental hazards, while joy appeared in small victories. Repaired homes, successful harvests, newborn children, or skillfully crafted tools. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced communal identity, psychological endurance, and social bonds. Even routine actions, sharing meals, tending livestock, repairing tools, offered opportunities for connection, learning, and emotional replenishment. Through craft, labor, observation, ritual, and strategic thinking, medieval Greeks navigated relentless challenges. Every skill, story, ritual, and decision contributed to a living mosaic of survival, resilience, and meaning. Life was actively shaped, continuously negotiated, and imbued with significance, reflecting human ingenuity, adaptability, and enduring spirit amidst hardship, uncertainty, and fleeting glimpses of beauty.